Take your things and leave. You were never truly a Caldwell." Eleanor Caldwell's voice cut through the crowded courtroom as she overturned the cardboard box, and 12 years of Claire's life scattered across the polished floor in front of every lawyer, every reporter, every wealthy guest who had come to watch a woman fall. A wedding photo cracked against the tile, a wedding ring rolled under a bench, and Nathan, the husband who once swore to protect her, stared at the wall and said nothing. If you are watching this right now, do me one small favor. Subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because this story is going to break your heart before it lifts it back up. And down in the comments, tell me the city where you are watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel from small towns to big cities all across the world. So let me know you are here. And now let's begin. Claire Whitmore did not move at first. She stood in the center of that courtroom, 35 years old, in the one good coat she still owned, and she watched her belongings roll across the floor like something spilled from a garbage bag. There was a coffee mug from the first apartment she and Nathan ever shared. There was a small framed drawing his niece had made for her years ago, back when this family still pretended to love her. There was a scarf her own mother had knitted before she passed. Small things, cheap things, the kind of things that mean nothing to anyone except the person who kept them. And now they were on the floor, and everyone was looking. "Eleanor," the judge said, his voice sharp, "control yourself, or I will have you removed from my courtroom." Eleanor Caldwell smoothed the front of her cream-colored jacket and lifted her chin. She was 61 years old, and she carried herself like a woman who had never once been told no. "I apologize, Your Honor," she said, though there was not a drop of apology anywhere in her. "I simply wanted to make sure she left with everything that belongs to her, which, as the record shows, is very little." A few of the guests near the back actually laughed, quietly, behind their hands. But Claire heard it. She heard every sound in that room, because when you are humiliated in public, your ears become cruel to you. They catch everything. Claire bent down slowly and began to gather her things. "Let me help you," her attorney whispered, crouching beside her. He was a tired man named Peterson who had taken her case at a discount because he owed a favor to a friend. He knew he was outmatched. He had known it from the first week. "Claire, don't. Let me. Please just stand up." "I've got it," Claire said quietly, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely close her fingers around the broken photo frame. Across the aisle, Nathan sat with his shoulders hunched, twisting his own wedding band around and around his finger. He had not taken it off yet. Claire noticed that. Even now, part of her noticed that, and part of her hated herself for noticing. "Nathan," she said. Just his name, that was all. He flinched like she had struck him, but he did not look at her. "Nathan, look at me," she said, still crouched on the floor, still holding the pieces of her life in her two hands. 12 years. You can't even look at me one time." His jaw moved. For half a second she thought he might speak. She thought after everything he might find some small piece of the man she married. But then Eleanor rested one manicured hand on her son's shoulder, and whatever he had been about to say died in his throat. He looked down at his shoes. And that, more than the box, more than the laughter, more than the ruined photograph, was the moment something inside Claire Whitmore went silent. The judge cleared his throat and pulled the proceedings back to order. "Given the terms of the prenuptial agreement," he said, reading from the papers in front of him, "and the absence of any contested marital assets in the petitioner's name, the court finds that the division of property stands as filed. Mrs. Whitmore will retain her personal effects and the settlement figure previously agreed upon." The settlement figure. Claire almost laughed. The settlement figure was less than a month of the grocery budget she used to manage for the Caldwell household. 12 years of running that home, 12 years of hosting Eleanor's dinners and remembering everyone's birthdays and covering for Nathan when he was too drunk or too distracted to show up for his own family. 12 years of being told that a wife in this family did not need her own money, did not need her own career, did not need anything but the privilege of the Caldwell name, and now the name was gone and she had nothing. "Do you understand these terms, Mrs. Whitmore?" the judge asked. Claire stood up. She held the box against her chest. "I understand them," she said. "I understood them a long time ago. I just didn't want to believe it." Eleanor smiled. That smile. Claire would remember that smile for the rest of her life. It was not the smile of a woman who had won. It was the smile of a woman who had never once considered the possibility of losing, who looked at Claire the way you might look at a stain being finely scrubbed out of an expensive rug. "You should have believed it years ago, dear," Eleanor said low enough that the judge could not quite hear. "I told Nathan the day he brought you home. A mechanic's daughter. I said that girl will never rise to who we are. And look how right I was." Claire turned to face her fully. For one moment, in the middle of the worst day of her life, something rose up in her chest that had been buried for 12 years. Not tears, not begging, something harder. "My father," Claire said, "worked with his hands his whole life. He was worth 10 of you, Eleanor, and he never once threw another human being's belongings on the floor to feel powerful." Eleanor's smile flickered. Just for a second. Just a flicker. But Claire saw it, and she held on to it because in that room it was the only thing she had won all day. Then it was over. The gavel came down. The lawyers began gathering their files. The guests, Eleanor's guests, the ones she had personally invited to watch her son shed the wife who no longer served the family image, began filing out in their expensive coats, murmuring to one another. Claire heard fragments as they passed her. "Poor thing." Well, what did she expect? "He'll do so much better now I've already introduced him to the Ashford girl." That last one hit her like ice water. She turned toward the voice, but the crowd had already swallowed it up. She stood alone by the defendant's table with a broken box against her chest. Nathan walked past her without a word. His mother had her arm looped through his. As they reached the doors, Claire called out one final time because she could not stop herself. "Nathan." He paused. The whole world seemed to pause with him. "Was any of it real?" Claire asked. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it. She hated that her voice cracked, but she could not help it. 12 years. Just tell me the truth. Was any single day of it real?" For a long moment, Nathan Caldwell stood there with his back to the woman he had married. And then, without turning around, he said the thing that Claire would carry with her into the rain, into the darkness, into every night for months to come. "You were convenient," he said. "You were never the plan." And he walked out. The doors swung shut behind him. Claire Whitmore stood alone in an emptying courtroom, 35 years old, holding a cardboard box that contained everything she had left in the world. And for the first time she understood, truly understood, that the man she had loved for 12 years had never loved her at all. She had not been a wife. She had been a placeholder, a hostess, a convenient arrangement that had outlived its usefulness the moment the family decided a different marriage would serve them better. "Claire," Peterson touched her elbow gently. "Is there someone I can call for you? Family? A friend?" She thought about that question. She thought about it for a long time. And the answer that came back terrified her, because the truth was, there was no one. Her mother was gone. Her father, the only person who had ever made her feel safe, had walked out of her life when she was 19 years old and never come back. She had built her whole world around Nathan and the Caldwells, and now that world had spat her out and there was no one left standing on the other side. "There's no one," Claire said. Peterson's face fell. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I wish I could have done more. This case, it was decided before we ever walked in. That prenup, the judge's hands were tied." "I know," Claire said. "You did your best. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" That question, too, opened up a hole under her feet. Because the answer was no. The apartment was in Nathan's name. The credit cards were canceled. The bank account she had shared with him had been drained and closed 3 weeks ago quietly, while she still thought they might somehow reconcile. She had checked it 2 days before and found it empty, and the shame of that, the shame of not even having noticed, still burned in her. She had 3 bags. She had a phone with a cracked screen that barely turned on, and she had folded in the inside pocket of her coat $47 in cash. That was the entire net worth of Claire Whitmore. "I'll figure it out," she said. She would not let herself cry in front of Peterson. She had already been humiliated enough for one lifetime. She picked up her 3 bags, one over each shoulder and one in her hand, and she walked out of the courtroom with her chin up, because it was the only thing she had left, that chin, that spine, that refusal to let them see her break. She held it together through the marble hallway. She held it together past the security desk. She held it together through the tall glass doors and out onto the courthouse steps. And then the rain hit her face, and she finally let herself feel it. It was coming down hard, a gray New York rain that soaked her within seconds. She had no umbrella. Of course she had no umbrella. She stood at the top of the courthouse steps with her 3 bags and her $47, and she watched the man she had loved for 12 years climb into a black town car with his mother and pull away into traffic without so much as a glance back at the woman standing alone in the storm. That was when the sound came out of her. Not a sob exactly. Something rawer than a sob. A single low sound torn up from somewhere deep, the sound a person makes when the last thread finally snaps. "You were convenient," she whispered to the rain, repeating his words back to the empty air. "You were never the plan." 12 years. She had given him 12 years. She had given up her career for him. She had been good at that career too. She had been rising fast at one of the best marketing firms in Manhattan when she met Nathan Caldwell, and everyone had told her she was going to run that place someday. She had a sharp mind for strategy and a gift for reading people, and she had loved the work, loved the feeling of walking into a room and knowing she had earned her place there. And then she had married into money, and the money had a voice, and the voice belonged to Eleanor Caldwell, and the voice said, "A wife in this family does not work. It reflects poorly on Nathan. It suggests he cannot provide." And Claire, 23 years old and drunk on love, had believed that giving up her whole self was proof of how much she loved him. She had handed them the knife. Standing in the rain, 35 now, she understood that for the first time, with a clarity that hurt worse than any of it, she had handed them the knife 12 years ago, and they had simply waited for the right moment to use it. A woman walked past her under a large black umbrella, glanced at Claire soaked to the bone with her bags, and hurried on. No one stopped. No one ever stopped in this city. Claire sank down onto the top step, not caring anymore about the wet stone. She pulled her 3 bags close against her body, the way a person holds the only thing they have left, and she stared out at the gray street, and for one long, dark moment, she genuinely did not know how she was going to keep going. She did not have money for a hotel. She did not have a home. She did not have a single person in the world to call. At 35 years old, Claire Whitmore had been erased. That was the word that kept coming to her, erased, like she had never existed at all. 12 years, and she had left nothing behind, kept nothing for herself, saved nothing because they had convinced her she did not need to, because she had believed them. "Okay," she said to herself out loud, the way frightened people do when they are trying to become brave. "Okay, think. You are smart. You were always smart. Think." But the panic kept rising, and no thoughts came, only the memory of the box hitting the floor, and the sound of the laughter, and Nathan's back as he walked away, and she pressed her forehead against her wet knees and let herself shake. What she did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that across the street, half a block down, a long black luxury sedan sat idling against the curb with its windows tinted dark. And inside that car, an old man was watching her. He had been watching for a long time. He had watched her walk out of the courthouse with her chin up. He had watched her hold herself together all the way down the steps. And he had watched the exact moment she broke when the rain hit her and the sound came out of her, and his own hands had tightened on the head of the cane resting across his knees until his knuckles went white. "Sir," said the driver, a younger man in the front seat, glancing back in the mirror. "Sir, do you want me to bring the car around? You shouldn't be out in this weather, the doctor said." "Not yet," the old man said. His voice was quiet and worn thin, the voice of a man who did not have very many words left and knew it. "Not yet, Marcus. Give me a moment." The old man's name was Richard Whitmore, and the woman crying on the courthouse steps in the rain, the woman the Caldwell family had just thrown away like garbage in front of a room full of strangers, was his daughter. He had not spoken to her in 16 years. He watched her now through the rain-streaked glass, and the years pressed down on him all at once, all of them, every single one he had spent away from her. He remembered a little girl who used to sit on the floor of his garage and hand him wrenches. He remembered a teenager who could argue circles around any adult in the room. He remembered the day he made the hardest decision of his life, the decision to disappear from her world so that the truth about who he really was would never poison the woman she was going to become. He had told himself it was the right thing. He had told himself she was better off not knowing. And now he was watching her sit alone in the rain with 3 bags and nothing else, and he understood far too late the full and terrible cost of the choice he had made. "Marcus," he said. "Yes, sir." "Do you know what they said about me, the people I worked with, the ones who understood what I really did?" Marcus glanced back, uncertain. "No, sir. They said I could see the value in a thing that everyone else had thrown away." Richard said, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "A company nobody wanted, a stock everyone was dumping, a piece of land they all called worthless. I looked at what other people discarded, Marcus, and I saw what it could become." He drew a slow, careful breath, the kind of breath a sick man has to plan for. "It made me one of the richest men in this country, and do you know the cruelest joke of it all?" "What's that, sir?" "I did it with everyone in the world except my own daughter," Richard said. "I saw her worth clear as day when she was a child. And then I let a family of cowards convince her over 12 years that she was worthless. And I did nothing. I sat in my houses and my boardrooms and my hospital chairs, and I told myself she was safer without me. And I did nothing." The rain drummed on the roof of the car. Down the street, Claire lifted her head. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, a useless gesture in the downpour, and she looked out at the gray city like a person deciding whether or not they still had the strength to stand up. Richard Whitmore watched his daughter make that decision. He watched her plant her feet. He watched her gather her 3 bags. He watched her rise slowly from the courthouse steps, soaked and shaking and completely alone, and lift her chin one more time and start walking down the sidewalk toward a future she could not see and did not have. And something in the old man's chest, something that had been hardening for 16 years, finally cracked open. "There she goes," he said softly. "There's my girl. Look at her, Marcus. They took everything from her and she still stood up." His voice caught. "She still stood up." "Sir, are you all right?" Richard Whitmore closed his eyes. He was not all right. He had not been all right for a long time. The doctors had given him numbers now, actual numbers, months instead of years, and he had spent those months doing the thing he did best in all the world, which was quietly moving pieces into place. He had made his final decision weeks ago, sitting in a hospital bed at 3 a.m, with nothing but the machines beeping around him and the weight of a lifetime of choices sitting on his chest. But watching her today had sealed it. Watching her humiliated, watching that woman throw a box of belongings on the floor, watching Nathan Caldwell refuse to even look at the wife he was betraying. It had turned a decision into a certainty, and it had turned grief into something with an edge to it. "Marcus," Richard said, opening his eyes, "I need you to do something for me, and I need it done quickly because I do not have the luxury of time anymore." "Anything, sir. Call Daniel Cross in the morning. Tell him to move up the timeline on everything we discussed. All of it. The estate, the transfer, the papers we prepared." Richard watched his daughter grow smaller down the block, a lone figure in the rain carrying 3 bags into the unknown. "And Marcus, tell him to move on the Caldwell holdings tonight. Every debt, every note, every dollar that family is leveraged against. I want it done before that woman wakes up tomorrow morning. I want it done before Eleanor Caldwell has finished celebrating." Marcus turned fully around in his seat, now his eyes wide. "Sir, the Caldwell holdings. That's the mansion, the businesses, all of it. If we call in those debts, that family, they'll be finished. They'll be ruined." Richard Whitmore looked at the empty place on the courthouse steps where his daughter had been sitting. "Yes," he said, "they will. But, sir, why now? Why them?" The old man was quiet for a moment. The rain fell. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady in a way it had not been all afternoon, the voice of a man who has stopped debating and started deciding. "Because they made one mistake, Marcus," Richard Whitmore said. "They thought she had no one. They looked at that woman and they saw someone with no money, no family, no power, no protection, and they decided that made her safe to destroy. He tapped the head of his cane once against the floor of the car. They were wrong. She had me. She had me the whole time. She just never knew it. He turned to the window one last time. "Take me home now, Marcus," he said quietly. "There is a great deal to do, and I am running out of days to do it in." The car pulled away from the curb and slid into the gray rain of the city, past the courthouse, past the steps, past the whole cruel afternoon, and several blocks ahead, walking alone with 3 bags soaked through and $47 in her pocket, Claire Whitmore had no idea that anything in the world had changed. She only knew that she was cold and tired and more alone than she had ever been in her life. She walked without a destination. She simply walked because sitting still felt like drowning, and walking at least felt like moving. She passed a coffee shop and looked in the warm window at the people inside, dry and laughing, and she thought about how she used to be one of them. She had money once, not her own, but money. She had a place in the world, and she had traded it all away for a family that had just proven in the most public way imaginable exactly what she had been worth to them. Convenient, never the plan. She stopped at a corner and pulled out her cracked phone. It flickered to life, the screen glitching, and she scrolled through her contacts with numb fingers looking for a single name she could call. Nathan's friends. Their friends. Eleanor's people. Every name in that phone belonged to the world she had just been thrown out of. She stopped on one name, and her thumb hovered over it. Her father. Richard Whitmore. She had never deleted his number, though it had been disconnected for years. She kept it the way you keep a scar. She stared at his name on the cracked screen, this man who had left her when she was 19. This man she had spent a decade and a half being angry at, and she felt the old grief rise up alongside the new one until she could barely tell them apart. "Where were you?" she whispered to the name on the screen. "All this time. Where were you?" She did not call. There was no point. The number was dead. He was probably dead too, for all she knew. A simple mechanic living some simple life somewhere who had walked out on his only daughter and never looked back. She put the phone away. She kept walking. By the time the rain finally began to ease, the light was fading, and Claire found herself outside a cheap motel on the edge of a neighborhood she did not recognize. The sign in the window said rooms were $49 a night. She had 47. She stood there and looked at that number, $49, $2 more than everything she had in the world. And something about it, something about being $2 short of a single night indoors, finally broke the last of her composure. She laughed. It came out ragged and wet and half a sob. $2. After 12 years of managing a household worth millions, she was $2 short of a motel room. "Excuse me?" she said to the man behind the desk when she went inside because she had nowhere else to try. I know how this sounds, but I have $47. The room is $49. I've had a very bad day. The worst day. Is there any way? Any way at all?" The man behind the desk was older than her father would be now, with tired eyes and a paperback novel open in front of him. He looked at Claire, soaked to the bone, 3 bags on her shoulders, mascara run down her face, and he looked at her for a long time. "Rough day, huh?" he said. "You could say that," Claire said, and her voice broke on it. The old man closed his paperback. He looked at her for another moment, and then he reached under the counter and slid a key across to her. "Room 11, he said. 47's fine. Round it down. And there's a vending machine down the hall's got coffee for free if you hit it in the right spot. Second from the left, give it a good smack." He almost smiled. "My wife used to say a bad day feels a lot better with a hot cup of something in your hands." Claire stared at the key. And then absurdly, in a cheap motel lobby on the worst day of her life, this small kindness from a stranger who owed her nothing undid her completely. The tears came, and she could not stop them, and she covered her mouth with her hand and cried, standing there while the old man behind the desk pretended not to notice and went back to his book to give her the dignity of it. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you. I'll pay you back. I promise. I'll pay you back the $2, I swear." "It's $2, the old man said gently, not looking up. "You don't owe me anything. Go get some rest, honey. Whatever happened today, it's over now. Tomorrow's a different day." Claire took the key. She went to room 11. She dropped her 3 bags on the floor beside the narrow bed. She peeled off her soaked coat and hung it over the shower rod. And she sat down on the edge of the mattress in her wet clothes, and she looked at herself in the mirror across the room. A 35-year-old woman with nothing. No home, no money, no family, no name. Everything she had built her life around had been taken from her in a single afternoon in a single courtroom, in front of a single box of belongings scattered across the floor. "You were never the plan," she said to her own reflection. And then quietly, in a voice she almost did not recognize as her own, she said something else. Something that surprised her. Something that came up from a place she thought Eleanor Caldwell had buried forever. "But I'm still here," Claire whispered. "You took everything and I'm still here. And you have no idea what I'm capable of, because I forgot. I let you make me forget, but I'm going to remember." She did not know how she was going to survive the week. She did not know how she was going to eat, or where she was going to live, or how a woman starts over with 3 bags and no money and no one. But she said it anyway, to the mirror, to the empty room, to the version of herself that the Caldwells thought they had destroyed. "I'm going to remember who I was before you." She lay back on the narrow bed with her wet clothes still on and stared at the water-stained ceiling, and somewhere in the exhaustion and the grief, she finally slept. She did not know that across the city, in a very different building, an old man was sitting alone in the dark with a lawyer on the phone moving mountains. She did not know that the number in her phone, the dead number belonging to a simple mechanic, belonged instead to one of the wealthiest men in America. She did not know that the debts holding up the entire Caldwell empire, the mansion and the businesses and the reputation and the pride, had quietly changed hands that very night, and that every one of them now belonged to a woman sleeping in a $47 motel room who did not even know his real name. She did not know that the man who had left her 16 years ago had never once stopped watching over her. And she did not know that in the morning everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. For now, Claire Whitmore slept. For now, she was just a woman who had lost everything. But the phone on the nightstand, the one with the cracked screen that barely worked, was going to ring in a few short hours. And a voice with a Swiss accent was going to say the words that would turn the entire world upside down. She did not know any of it yet. She only slept and breathed and survived one more night, which on the worst day of her life was the bravest thing she could have done. And somewhere across the sleeping city, Richard Whitmore set down the phone, looked out the window at the rain finally clearing, and allowed himself one long, tired breath. "Hold on, sweetheart," he said to the darkness, to the daughter who could not hear him. "Just hold on a little longer. Help is coming. It was always coming. You just never knew." The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. Claire came awake all at once, the way frightened people do, her heart already pounding before her eyes were even open. For one terrible second she did not know where she was. The water-stained ceiling, the narrow bed, the 3 bags on the floor. And then it all came back, the courtroom and the box and the rain and the $2, and she almost wished she had stayed asleep. The phone rang again, buzzing and rattling against the cheap nightstand, its cracked screen flickering. She stared at it. An international number. A string of digits she did not recognize longer than any American number, with a country code she had never seen. Probably a wrong number, she murmured to herself, or a scam. But something made her answer it anyway. Maybe it was that she had nothing left to protect, so a scam call held no fear for her. Maybe it was just the strange dead quiet of that motel room and the simple human need to hear another voice. "Hello?" she said. "Good morning," said a voice on the other end. It was a man's voice, calm and precise, with the clipped elegance of a European accent. Swiss, she would learn later. "Am I speaking with Claire Whitmore?" Claire sat up slowly. "Who is this?" "My name is Daniel Cross," the voice said. "I am an attorney. I am calling from Geneva, Switzerland on a matter of considerable importance. I want to first confirm that I am speaking with the correct person. Your full name is Claire Elizabeth Whitmore. You were born on the 14th of March. Your mother was Diane Whitmore, and your father, Miss Whitmore, was a man named Richard Whitmore." Every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Claire's mouth went dry. How do you know all of that? Because I have spent the better part of 2 decades in the service of your father, Daniel Cross said, and it is regarding your father that I am calling you this morning. My father. Claire's hand tightened around the cracked phone. Something cold moved through her chest. I haven't spoken to my father in 16 years. He left. He walked out when I was 19 and he never came back. Whatever this is about, I don't have any part in his life. There was a pause on the line, a careful, weighted pause. Miss Whitmore, Daniel Cross said gently, I am very sorry to be the one to tell you this. Your father passed away 3 days ago. The room went silent. Claire heard the words. She understood each one on its own, but somehow put together, they refused to mean anything at first. Her father passed away 3 days ago. No, she said. It was not an argument. It was just the word that came out. No, that's you have the wrong person. My father was a mechanic. He fixed cars. I don't even know where he lived. You've made a mistake. I have not made a mistake, Daniel Cross said, and there was such quiet certainty in his voice that Claire felt the floor beginning to tilt beneath her. I understand this is a great shock, and I understand there is a great deal about your father that you did not know. That is precisely why I am calling. Miss Whitmore, before he died, your father named you the sole heir to his entire estate. Claire laughed. She could not help it. It came out sharp and disbelieving, and it echoed strangely in the little room. His estate. You mean what, his tools, his truck? I appreciate the call, Mr. Cross, but I promise you, my father did not have an estate. He barely had anything. That was sort of the whole point of my life. That's what everyone always reminded me of. The mechanic's daughter. The bitterness rose in her before she could stop it. So whatever you think he left me, I can assure you it's a mistake. Or it's a scam. And either way, I've had the worst 48 hours of my life and I really don't have the strength for it. Miss Whitmore. Daniel Cross's voice did not change. If anything, it grew even more careful. I'm going to say something to you now, and I need you to listen very closely because I know it will be difficult to believe. Your father, Richard Whitmore, was not a mechanic, or rather he was once long ago, but for the last 30 years of his life, he was the founder and sole owner of a private investment firm that operated almost entirely outside of public view. At the time of his death, the total value of the estate he has left to you is approximately $5.2 billion. The phone slipped in Claire's hand. She caught it against her cheek. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. What did you say? $5.2 billion, Daniel Cross repeated slowly, evenly. Along with controlling interest in several companies, a number of properties across the United States and abroad, a charitable foundation, and a significant portfolio of privately held debt instruments. All of it, Miss Whitmore. He left all of it to you, and only to you. Claire could not speak. She sat on the edge of the narrow motel bed in the clothes she had slept in with $2 less than a room to her name, and a voice from Geneva was telling her she was worth more than $5 billion, and the two facts were so violently incompatible that her mind simply refused to hold them both at once. That's not possible, she finally whispered. That's not Mr. Cross, that's not possible. My father left us. He left me and my mother. We had nothing. When my mother got sick, we had nothing. Do you understand? We lost everything trying to pay for her treatment. Where was he? Where was all this money when my mother was dying in a county hospital because we couldn't afford anything better? Where was he then? Her voice cracked apart on the last word, and to her horror, she realized she was crying 16 years of buried grief and rage pouring out of her into a phone call with a stranger. Daniel Cross was quiet for a long moment. Miss Whitmore, he said softly, your father anticipated that you would ask that question, and he left you a letter. It is quite long, and it explains a great deal that I am not able to explain to you myself. I am going to fly to New York today. I would like to meet with you in person to deliver the letter and to begin the process of transferring the estate. Where are you currently staying? Claire looked around the little room. At the water stain, at the vending machine coffee she had never gone to get, at the 3 bags on the floor. She started, and then the shame closed her throat and she could not finish. Miss Whitmore, Daniel Cross's voice gentled further, and she understood somehow that he already knew, that he knew about the courtroom and the box and the $47, that her father had known. I am going to arrange a suite for you at a hotel in Manhattan. A car will come to collect you within the hour. Please do not argue with me about this. It is what your father would have wanted, and frankly, it is the very least of what is now owed to you. Gather your things and be ready. Someone will call this number when they arrive. And then before she could protest, before she could tell him this was insane, that she did not believe a word of it, that she could not accept a car or a hotel from a dead stranger, she had spent 16 years hating, the line went quiet. Claire sat there holding the cracked phone against her ear long after the call had ended. $5.2 billion. She said it out loud once, just to hear how impossible it sounded in the empty room. $5.2 billion. And then she laughed again, and then the laugh turned into something else, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and sat very still, trying to breathe, trying to understand a world that had just turned itself completely inside out for the second time in 2 days. The car came 51 minutes later. It was black and long, and it did not belong on that street, and the driver who stepped out to open her door wore a suit worth more than everything Claire owned combined. He took her 3 cheap bags as though they were made of gold, and he said, "Miss Whitmore, it's an honor," in a voice that suggested he meant it, and Claire climbed into the back of that car in her slept-in clothes and did not know whether she was dreaming or losing her mind. By noon, she was standing in a hotel suite on the 40th floor with a view of the whole city, and a man named Daniel Cross was sitting across from her at a marble table, and he was exactly as calm and precise in person as he had been on the phone. He was perhaps 50 silver at the temples, with kind and tired eyes, and he set a leather folder on the table between them and folded his hands. "Before we discuss the estate," he said, "I want to give you this." He slid an envelope across the table. It was thick, cream-colored, and on the front, in handwriting that stopped Claire's heart cold, was written a single word: Claire Bear. She had not seen that word in 16 years. It was what he had called her when she was small. Claire Bear. It was the name he used when she fell off her bike, when she was scared of thunder, when she brought home a bad grade and thought the world was ending. Claire Bear. Nobody else had ever called her that. Nobody else had ever known. Her hands were shaking as she picked up the envelope. "I'll give you privacy," Daniel Cross said, rising. "Take all the time you need. I'll be just outside." The door closed softly behind him, and Claire Whitmore was alone with a letter from her dead father. For a long time she could not open it. She just held it and traced the letters of that old name with her thumb and let the grief roll through her in waves. When she finally broke the seal, her tears were already falling, and she had to wipe her eyes twice before the words would hold still on the page. "My Claire Bear," it began. "If you are reading this, then I have run out of time, and there is so much I never got to say to you. Sit down, sweetheart. This is going to be hard." And then page after page in her father's own steady hand, the truth of her entire life unfolded. He had not left because he stopped loving her. He wrote that first before anything else because he knew it was the thing she had spent 16 years believing. He had left because of the money, because by the time she was a teenager, he had already become something he never intended to become, a man of enormous and hidden wealth, and he had watched what money did to families, watched it turn children into monsters and love into calculation. And he had made a decision that he called the worst and most cowardly of his life. He had decided that the only way to make sure his daughter grew up with a real character, real strength, a real understanding of her own worth that had nothing to do with a bank account was to raise her without ever knowing the money existed at all. "I wanted you to become someone before you became rich," he wrote. "I have seen what happens when it goes the other way. I have seen it 100 times. The child who inherits the empire before they have earned a single thing and spends the rest of their life as a small, frightened person hiding inside a large pile of money. I did not want that for you. I wanted you to know who you were with your own 2 hands, so I stayed away. And I told myself it was noble, and Claire, I was wrong. God help me, I was so wrong, and I have paid for it every single day. Dim. Claire read that line 3 times, and each time the sob rose higher in her chest. He wrote about her mother, about Diane. He wrote that leaving her had broken something in him that never healed, and that when Diane got sick, he had wanted more than anything in the world to come back to pay for the finest doctors on earth to make it all stop. And he had not, because Diane herself had asked him not to, because his wife on her deathbed had looked at the letters he sent and made him promise to hold the line to let their daughter finish becoming herself, to wait. "Your mother was stronger than both of us," he wrote. "She died protecting the plan we made together, a plan I have hated every day since. She made me promise to wait until you had lived a full life on your own terms, until you truly knew your own strength. And I waited. God forgive me, I waited far too long." And then he wrote about the Caldwells. He wrote that he had watched her marriage, that he had known from a distance the whole time, watching through people. He paid to watch that the family she married into was slowly taking her apart. He wrote that he had nearly broken his promise 12 times, nearly walked back into her life to pull her out of that house, and that every time he had told himself she was strong enough that she would find her own way out, that the plan required patience. "And then I watched them throw your things on the floor of a courtroom," he wrote, and here his handwriting changed, grew harder, pressed deeper into the page. "And I understood that I had run out of time to be patient. I understood that I had spent 16 years teaching you to be strong, and while I did it, I let a family of cowards teach you that you were weak. The plan is over, Claire. The waiting is over, and now I am going to do the one thing a father is supposed to do, which is stand between his child and the people who would hurt her, even if I have to do it from beyond the grave." Claire lowered the letter. She sat there in a hotel suite worth more per night than she used to spend in a month, and she understood finally that everything she had believed about her own life was false. Her father had not abandoned her. He had loved her so much and so badly and so wrongly that he had spent his entire life trying to protect her from the very thing he was leaving her now. There was one more page. At the bottom, beneath everything else, her father had written something that made Claire go very still. "You will find when Daniel walks you through the estate that among the many things I owned at the end of my life, there is one collection of assets that will interest you most of all. Over the last several years, quietly and through many intermediaries, I purchased nearly every debt the Caldwell family holds. Their mansion is mortgaged to a company you now own. Their businesses are financed by notes you now control. Their entire fortune, Claire, the fortune they used to make you feel small, is built on a foundation that now belongs to you. I did not do this for revenge. I want you to understand that. I did it because a wise man once taught me that the only real protection in this world is to never again be at the mercy of someone who wishes you harm. They will never again have power over you. Because now, my daughter, you have all the power over them. What you do with it is entirely your choice. I trust you to be better than they were. I always did." Claire read those words, and then she set the letter down on the marble table, and she covered her face with both hands, and for a long time the only sound in that beautiful room was the sound of a woman weeping. For a father she had spent 16 years believing she had lost, and had only truly lost 3 days ago. When Daniel Cross returned an hour later, he found her sitting by the window with the letter folded in her lap, and her eyes red but dry. "I'm ready," she said quietly. "Tell me everything. Tell me all of it." And so he did. Over the next 2 days, Daniel Cross walked Claire Whitmore through the shape of her new life, and every hour of it stretched her understanding of the world a little further past its breaking point. The $5.2 billion was not an exaggeration. If anything, he told her it was conservative because it did not fully account for the value of the private companies, which were worth far more than their book value suggested. There were properties, a house in Connecticut she had never seen, an apartment in London, land in 3 states. There was the foundation her father had built, a quiet charitable organization that she was stunned to learn had for years been funding programs to help women re-enter the workforce after leaving marriages and losing their financial independence. "He built that," she said, staring at the papers. "He built a foundation for women like me, years before any of this happened to me." "He did," Daniel Cross said. "I believe, Miss Whitmore, that your father spent a great deal of his life quietly trying to make right for other people the thing he could not bring himself to fix for you until the very end." Claire pressed her lips together and looked out the window and did not answer for a while. And then there were the debts. Daniel Cross laid them out with the same calm precision he brought to everything, and as he did, Claire felt something in her go very cold and very still. He showed her the mortgage on the Caldwell mansion, the grand house on the Upper East Side, where Eleanor Caldwell had hosted the dinners Claire spent 12 years managing. It was held by a holding company. The holding company was hers. He showed her the credit lines that kept the Caldwell family businesses running the import company, the real estate arm, the various ventures Nathan pretended to manage. Every one of them was financed against notes that her father had purchased, notes that now sat in her portfolio like loaded weapons. To be clear about what this means, Daniel Cross said, you now hold the power to call in these debts at any time. If you were to do so, the Caldwell family would be unable to meet the obligations. Their assets would be liquidated. Their businesses would collapse. Within a matter of months, everything they own could be gone. He watched her carefully. I am obligated to tell you that this power exists. I am not advising you to use it. Your father was very clear that the choice was to be yours and yours alone. Claire stared at the papers for a long time. She thought about the box hitting the floor. She thought about the laughter behind cupped hands. She thought about Nathan turning his back and saying, "You were never the plan." She thought about Eleanor's smile that had said she was a stain being scrubbed out of a rug. And she felt it, the pull of it, the dark and simple satisfaction of it. She could destroy them. She could pick up a phone and destroy them the way they had destroyed her, and she could do it before the week was out. Miss Whitmore, Daniel Cross said quietly. Claire drew a slow breath. Not yet, she said. Daniel Cross tilted his head slightly. May I ask why not? I assure you no one would blame you. Because my father asked me to be better than they were, Claire said. She looked down at the papers, at the loaded weapons her father had left her, and she pushed them gently to one side. And because destroying them the moment I have the power to do it, that's exactly what Eleanor would do. That's exactly who she is. She saw someone she thought was weak, and she moved to crush her because that's the only kind of strength she understands. If I do the same thing, then she was right about me. Then I'm just another version of her. Claire shook her head slowly. No, I don't want to become the thing they tried to make me. I want to become the thing they tried to make me forget I already was. Daniel Cross looked at her for a long moment, and something in his tired eyes shifted, softened, became something almost like wonder. Your father said you would say something very much like that, he said quietly. He told me if she reaches for the trigger the moment I hand it to her, then I failed, and there is nothing more to be done. But if she sets it down, Daniel, if she sets it down and asks how to build, instead of how to burn, then she is exactly who I always believed she was, and you are to give her everything and follow her lead for the rest of your days. He paused. He believed you would set it down, Miss Whitmore, and you have. Claire had to look away out the window so he would not see her eyes fill again. What happens now? She asked when she could trust her voice. Now, Daniel Cross said, you learn. Your father assembled a team for exactly this purpose, people he trusted completely, people whose only instruction was to prepare you to lead. There is a man named Alexander Hayes. He served as your father's chief advisor for over 20 years. He knows every company, every asset, every relationship in the empire. He has agreed to teach you everything if you are willing to learn. And there is a woman named Sophia Bennett. She is an image strategist, one of the best in the country. Your father engaged her some time ago in anticipation of the day you would step into public life. Daniel Cross allowed himself the smallest of smiles. He thought of everything, Miss Whitmore. He had years to plan this, and he used every one of them. Alexander Hayes turned out to be a broad, gray-haired man in his 60s with the steady, unhurried manner of someone who had spent a lifetime making enormous decisions and never once raised his voice to do it. He came to the hotel the next morning, and when he shook Claire's hand, he held it a moment longer than necessary and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. You have his eyes, he said finally. Richards. I worked beside that man for 22 years, and I would know those eyes anywhere. He cleared his throat, and she realized he was moved, this large, steady man, and trying not to show it. He talked about you constantly, you know. Constantly. Every meeting, every dinner, half of it was Claire this and Claire that. My daughter's brilliant, he'd say. My daughter would see right through this deal. My daughter's the smartest person I've ever known, and she doesn't even know it. Alexander Hayes shook his head. I feel as though I already know you, Miss Whitmore, and I feel as though I owe you an apology on his behalf for how long he made you wait. Claire had to sit down. He talked about me, she said. All this time, he talked about me. He never stopped, Alexander Hayes said gently. Not once. Now. He set a heavy briefcase on the table and opened it, and his manner shifted from grief to business, though the warmth stayed underneath it. Your father left instructions that I was to teach you everything, and I intend to honor them. But I'll tell you the same thing I told him I would. I'm not going to teach you to be a figurehead. I could put you at the head of a table and let the professionals run everything while you smile for photographs. Plenty of heirs do exactly that. But that's not what he wanted. And frankly, from what I've heard about you, it's not who you are. So I'm going to teach you to actually lead, which means it's going to be hard. It's going to be relentless. Are you prepared for that? Claire looked at the briefcase. She looked at Alexander Hayes. She thought about the woman she had been 3 days ago, sitting on the courthouse steps in the rain, believing her life was over. 12 years ago, Claire said, I gave up a career I loved because a family told me I didn't need it. That a woman like me should stay home and support a man and be grateful for the privilege. I believed them. I let them convince me that the sharpest thing about me, my mind, the thing I was proudest of, was something I should be ashamed of. She met his eyes steadily. So yes, Mr. Hayes, I'm prepared for hard. Hard is the least of what I'm prepared for. Teach me. Teach me everything. And don't you dare go easy on me. Alexander Hayes looked at her for a long moment. And then for the first time since he had arrived, he smiled a real smile, wide and warm and full of something that looked a great deal like relief. Oh, he said quietly. Oh, you really are his daughter, aren't you? He was right. He was right about all of it. He pulled a stack of documents from the briefcase and slid them across the table. Let's begin, Miss Whitmore. We have a great deal to do, and I have a feeling you're going to move faster than any of us expect. And so it began. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Claire had ever experienced. She rose before dawn and worked past midnight. Alexander Hayes taught her the architecture of the Empire Company, by company, deal by deal, and she absorbed it faster than even he had predicted. Because the truth was that the mind Eleanor Caldwell had spent 12 years trying to bury had never gone anywhere. It had only been waiting. Claire found that she understood these things in her bones, that she could look at a balance sheet the way other people looked at a photograph, that she could sit in a meeting and read the room, read every unspoken thing, the way she always had back when she was rising through that marketing firm, and everyone said she was going to run the place. You see it, Alexander Hayes said one night, watching her tear apart a proposed acquisition that 3 of the firm's analysts had recommended. You see the thing underneath the thing. That's rare. That can't be taught. Your father had it. You have it. They told me I didn't, Claire said, not looking up from the papers. For 12 years, they told me the only thing I was good for was arranging flowers and remembering birthdays. Eleanor used to say in front of guests that it was charming how I still thought I had opinions about business. She circled a figure on the page. This valuation is inflated by at least 40%. Whoever prepared it is either incompetent or hiding something, and I'd put my money on hiding something. Look at the way they have structured the receivables. That's all. Alexander Hayes looked, and then he sat back and let out a low whistle. You found in 20 minutes what my team missed for 2 weeks, he said. Miss Whitmore, Claire, I need you to understand something. The woman that family told you that you were that woman never existed. They invented her. They invented a small, weak, foolish version of you, and then they spent 12 years insisting she was real until you believed it too. He tapped the paper she had just dismantled. This is who you are. This. Don't ever let anyone make you forget it again. Claire looked at him, and something moved behind her eyes, and she nodded slowly and did not trust herself to speak. Sophia Bennett was a different kind of teacher entirely. She was in her 40s, sharp and stylish, and quick with a way of looking at a person that seemed to take in everything at once. And her job, she explained on the first day, was not to change Claire, but to make sure the world could finally see her. "Here's the thing nobody tells you," Sophia said, circling Claire slowly in the hotel suite, studying her the way a sculptor studies a block of marble. "Power isn't just what you have, it's what people believe you have. And right now you carry yourself like a woman who's been apologizing for existing for 12 years. It's in your shoulders. It's in the way you drop your eyes when someone challenges you. It's in the way you say sorry before you say anything else." And Sophia stopped in front of her. "They trained that into you, honey. That family. They spent 12 years training you to make yourself small so their son could look big. And we are going to untrain it. Not because you need to look powerful, because you need to stop hiding the power you already have." Claire felt her eyes sting. "I don't know if I can." "You already are," Sophia said. "You just did it yesterday. Hayes told me. You took apart a bad deal in front of a room full of men who've been doing this for 30 years, and you didn't apologize once. You didn't soften it. You didn't smile to make it easier for them. That's the woman we're building around. She's already in there. My whole job is just to stop letting you hide her." And slowly, day by day, it happened. Claire watched herself change in the mirrors of that hotel suite. She watched her shoulders come back down and her chin come up. Not the desperate, defiant chin of the courthouse steps, but something steadier, something that came from underneath. She stopped saying sorry before she spoke. She learned to let a silence sit in a room until the other person filled it. She learned that she did not have to earn the right to take up space, that the space was already hers, that it had always been hers, and that the only thing that had ever taken it from her was a family that needed her small. One evening, near the end of those weeks, Alexander Hayes found her standing at the window of the suite, looking out at the city, very quiet. "You're thinking about them," he said. Claire did not turn around. "Is it that obvious?" "You get a certain look," he said. "Your father got the same one when there was a piece on the board he hadn't decided how to move yet." He came and stood beside her. "You still hold every debt they have, Claire. You could end them tomorrow. Some days I can see you thinking about it." "Every day," Claire admitted quietly. "I think about it every single day. There's a part of me, Alex, a part I'm not proud of, that wants to pick up the phone and take it all. The mansion, the businesses, the name. I want to make Eleanor Caldwell stand in an empty house that used to be hers, holding a box of her own belongings, and I want her to understand exactly how it felt." She let out a slow breath. "That part is very loud some nights. And the other part," Claire was quiet for a moment. "The other part," she said, "remembers something my father wrote. He said, the only real protection in this world is to never again be at the mercy of someone who wishes you harm. And I've been thinking about that. Because taking everything from them, burning it all down, that isn't power, Alex. That's just the same fear Eleanor lives in, wearing a different coat. If I destroy them the second I'm able to, then I'm still letting them run my life. I'm still living in that courtroom." She turned from this window at last, and her eyes were clear and steady. "I don't want to spend the fortune my father died to give me getting revenge on people who aren't worth it. I want to build something. I want that foundation to help 10,000 women who felt exactly the way I felt on those steps. That's the power. Not tearing them down, becoming someone so far beyond them that they finally understand they were never anything I needed. Alexander Hayes looked at her for a long, long moment, and then he said very quietly, "In 22 years, I only ever met one other person who thought like that, and you have his eyes." He had to clear his throat before he continued. "There's something you should know. Something I've been waiting to tell you until I was sure you were ready. And after that, I think you are." Claire turned fully toward him. "What is it?" "An invitation arrived at the Foundation's office this morning," Alexander Hayes said. "Addressed to the estate of Richard Whitmore. Now that his passing is quietly known in certain circles, the wealthy have begun to reach out the way they do to establish connections with whoever inherited. Most of them are meaningless. But this one," he reached into his jacket and drew out a heavy cream envelope, and he held it out to her. This one I thought you might want to see personally." Claire took it. She opened it. She drew out the card inside thick and elegant and embossed in gold, and she read the words printed on it, and her whole body went still. It was an invitation to the Caldwell Foundation's annual charity gala. The same gala she had attended for 12 years as Nathan's forgotten wife. The same gala where she had stood silently in the corner while Eleanor introduced her to guests as Nathan's wife. She keeps the house, as though that were her entire name. The invitation had been sent to the estate of Richard Whitmore as a matter of routine, one wealthy family reaching out to another with no possible idea, who the estate of Richard Whitmore actually belonged to now. Eleanor Caldwell had just personally invited Claire to her own party, and she did not have the faintest idea that she had done it. Claire stared at the invitation in her hands. Alexander Hayes watched her face, and Sophia Bennett, who had come in quietly during the conversation, watched her from the doorway, and neither of them said a word. For a long moment, Claire did not move. And then slowly something crossed her face that neither of them had seen there before. Not rage, not grief, something calm and clear and absolutely certain, the look of a woman who has finally understood exactly what she is going to do. "Sophia," Claire said quietly, still looking at the card. "Yes. You said your job was to let the world finally see me." Sophia straightened slowly. "I did." Claire lowered the invitation. She looked up, and her eyes had that steadiness in them now, that thing that came from underneath, the thing 12 years had buried, and 3 weeks had finally begun to bring back to the surface. "Then let's make sure," Claire said, "that the first place they see me is the one room where they all decided I was nothing." Sophia Bennett let out a slow breath. A smile spread across her face, sharp and delighted. Alexander Hayes said nothing at all. He only looked at Claire Whitmore standing at the window with her father's eyes and her father's mind, and an invitation to walk back into the lion's den, and he understood with complete certainty that the woman the Caldwells had thrown away on a courtroom floor was gone. And in her place stood someone they were not remotely prepared to meet. Claire set the invitation down on the table, face up, so the gold letters caught the light. "RSVP, yes," she said. "One guest, under my own name." She looked out the window one last time at the city, where 6 weeks earlier she had walked away from a courthouse with 3 bags and $47, believing her life was over. "My real name," Claire said softly. "Claire Whitmore. Let them read it and wonder. They'll find out soon enough exactly who that is." The gala was 3 weeks away, and Claire spent every one of those days preparing for it, the way a general prepares for a battle she intends to win without firing a shot. She did not buy a gown to impress anyone. She understood now that trying to impress the Caldwells was itself a kind of surrender, a way of still letting them be the judges. Instead, she worked. She sat with Alexander Hayes until she knew the Caldwell family's financial position better than Eleanor Caldwell knew it herself. She learned exactly how much they owed exactly when the notes came due, exactly how thin the ground was beneath that grand old mansion. She learned that the family's import business had missed 2 payments in the last quarter, that Nathan's real estate ventures were bleeding money he was hiding from his mother, that the entire glittering Caldwell fortune was, when you looked at it clearly, a beautiful house built on a foundation of debt, that now every single dollar of it belonged to her. "They're closer to the edge than they know," Alexander Hayes told her one evening, laying out the numbers. "Eleanor runs that family on appearances. She always has. As long as the parties keep happening and the mansion keeps its lights on, she believes she's untouchable. She has no idea how leveraged they are. Nathan's been lying to her about the businesses for 2 years. If you called in even a fraction of what you hold, the whole thing would come down within 90 days. "I know," Claire said quietly. "I'm not going to call it in. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not the way you mean." She looked at the numbers, at the fragile architecture of the family that had destroyed her. "I don't want to knock the house down, Alex. I want to walk through the front door as the person who owns the ground it stands on. And I want Eleanor to serve me a glass of champagne in her own home without having the faintest idea that she's a guest in a house that already belongs to me." Alexander Hayes shook his head slowly, something like awe in his expression. "That's colder than tearing it down." "No," Claire said. "It's just truer. Tearing it down would be a tantrum. This is just letting them stand in the reality they built and finally see it clearly." The night before the gala, Sophia Bennett came to the suite for the last fitting, and when Claire stepped out in the gown they had chosen together, Sophia went quiet. The dress was deep dark blue, the color of the sky, just after the sun has gone. It was simple. There was nothing loud about it, nothing that shouted for attention. It did not need to. It was cut to move like water, and it made Claire look exactly like what she now was, a woman who had stopped asking permission to be seen. "Well," Sophia said finally, and her voice was thick, "look at you." Claire looked at herself in the mirror. She turned slowly. She barely recognized the woman looking back, and at the same time she recognized her completely, because it was not a new woman at all. It was the woman she had been at 23, walking into that marketing firm like she owned it before a family had spent 12 years convincing her to disappear. "I remember her," Claire said softly to her own reflection. "I remember who this is." "Good," Sophia said, "because tomorrow so will they." The gala was held as it always was at the Caldwell mansion, and Claire arrived deliberately late. She had planned it that way down to the minute. She wanted the room full. She wanted the champagne poured, the conversations flowing, Eleanor deep in her element, holding court among the wealthy and the powerful, believing herself untouchable in the house she had ruled for 40 years. She wanted, in short, for everyone to have forgotten entirely that such a person as Claire had ever existed, so that her arrival would land like a stone through glass. At 8:40 in the evening, a black car pulled up to the front of the Caldwell mansion, and Claire Whitmore stepped out of it alone. She did not hurry. She walked up the steps she had walked up 100 times as Nathan's forgotten wife, and she gave her name at the door, her own name, Claire Whitmore. And she watched the young man checking the list, run his finger down, and find it exactly where it should be, RSVP confirmed one guest. And she watched him not recognize the name at all. And she walked inside. For a moment, nothing happened. She stood at the top of the short staircase that led down into the great room, and the party carried on beneath her, a sea of expensive people who did not yet know she was there. And she stood there, and she let herself feel it this last moment before everything changed, the strange, still calm of it. And then one by one, people began to look up. It started with a woman near the bottom of the stairs, someone Claire had met a dozen times over the years, someone who had looked straight through her at every one of those parties. The woman glanced up and glanced away, and then glanced back sharply, her face going slack with confusion, because there was something familiar about the woman at the top of the stairs, and she could not place it, could not reconcile the poised figure in the dark blue gown with any memory she could find. "Is that?" the woman said to her husband. "Doesn't she look like—" "No, it couldn't be." But it was. Recognition moved through the room like a current through water. Claire descended the stairs slowly, unhurried, and behind her, the murmur rose low at first, and then higher, a wave of whispers that chased her progress across the floor. "That's not. It is. It's her. It's Nathan's wife, ex-wife, the one at the divorce. Is that? It can't be." And Claire walked through it all with her chin level and her shoulders down, and a small, calm smile on her face, and she did not look at any of them, because she had learned that the most powerful thing a person can do in a room full of people desperate for their attention is to simply not need it. Nathan saw her from across the room. He was standing near the bar with a young woman on his arm, the Ashford girl Claire had heard whispered about on the courthouse steps, and he was laughing at something relaxed, easy king of his little world. And then his eyes found the figure moving through the crowd, and the laugh died on his face, and the color drained out of it all at once, and the glass in his hand tilted so far that the wine ran down over his fingers, and he did not even notice. "Nathan?" the young woman said. "Nathan, you're spilling." He did not answer. He could not. He was staring at his ex-wife walking through his mother's party like she owned the floor, and every calculation he had ever made about Claire Whitmore was collapsing in real time behind his eyes. Claire felt his gaze land on her. She did not turn toward it. She let him look. She let him stand there with wine running down his hand, watching the woman he had called convenient move through a room that had gone quiet around her. And she gave him nothing at all, not a glance, not a flicker. And somehow, that was worse for him than any confrontation could have been. It was Eleanor who reached her first. Eleanor Caldwell had spent 40 years developing an instinct for disruptions in her own parties, and she had felt this one before. She understood it felt the change in the room's temperature, the way the conversations had thinned. She came sweeping across the floor with a hostess's smile already fixed on her face, ready to smooth over whatever small commotion had arisen, and she did not recognize Claire until she was almost on top of her. And then she did. Claire watched it happen. She watched the exact moment Eleanor Caldwell's mind caught up to what her eyes were seeing. The smile stayed on her face, but everything behind it fell away the way a house looks the same from the street for a moment after the fire has already gutted the inside. "Claire," Eleanor said. Just the name. It came out flat, stunned, stripped of all its usual command. "Eleanor," Claire said pleasantly. "What a lovely party. You always did know how to throw one." Eleanor's eyes moved over her, taking in the gown, the poise, the calm, and Claire could see her trying to make sense of it, trying to fit this woman into the small box she had spent 12 years building. It would not fit. Nothing fit. Eleanor started and then stopped, and then recovered a fraction of herself enough to lower her voice and lean in. "I don't recall sending you an invitation." "You didn't," Claire said. "Not to me exactly. You sent it to the estate of a man named Richard Whitmore." She tilted her head slightly. "I believe your foundation reaches out to significant estates as a matter of course, building relationships with old money. It's a smart practice, honestly. I'd have done the same in your position." Eleanor's smile flickered. "The estate of... I don't understand. What does some estate have to do with you being in my house?" And Claire, standing in the center of the great room where 12 years of humiliation had been quietly heaped upon her, let the silence stretch just long enough. "Richard Whitmore was my father," she said. For a moment, Eleanor simply did not react because the pieces were too far apart for her to assemble. The mechanic's daughter. That had been the whole story, hadn't it? That had been the joke she'd told at 100 dinners, the girl from nothing who married up and was lucky to have done it. "Your father was a mechanic," Eleanor said. "You told me that yourself. Everyone knew that. That's what you were. A mechanic's." "That's what he let the world believe," Claire said, "for most of his life. Because he understood something you never will, Eleanor. He understood that the loudest money in the room is usually the weakest. He didn't need anyone to know what he was." She held Eleanor's eyes. "He was worth $5.2 billion when he died last month, and he left all of it to me." The champagne glass in Eleanor Caldwell's hand did not shatter. But Claire watched her fingers tighten around the stem until the knuckles went white, watched the color leave her face the same way it had left her son's, and it was, Claire thought, the single most honest expression she had ever seen Eleanor make. "That's a lie," Eleanor whispered. "That's not. You're lying." "You can check," Claire said gently. "You have people. I'm sure they can confirm it by morning. But you already know I'm not lying, Eleanor, because you're looking at my face right now, and for the first time in 12 years, you're actually seeing me." She let a beat pass. "You spent a decade telling everyone in this room that I was nothing. And I want you to understand something. You weren't entirely wrong. I did have nothing for a little while. I walked out of that courthouse with 3 bags and $47 and no one in the world. You made sure of it." She smiled, and there was no cruelty in it, which somehow made it land harder. "But you made one mistake. You looked at a woman with no money and no family and no power, and you decided that made her safe to destroy. You never once considered that you might be wrong about who she was underneath." Eleanor opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And across the room, drawn by some terrible gravity, Nathan had finally begun to move toward them, pale and unsteady, the young woman forgotten behind him, and the whole party had gone so quiet now that Claire's calm voice carried to the far corners of the room. "I'm not here to make a scene," Claire said, loud enough for exactly as many people as she wanted to hear it. "I would never do to you what you did to me. I'm simply here as a guest. Your guest. You invited me after all." She glanced around the beautiful room, at the high ceilings, at the chandeliers, at the walls, hung with the portraits of Caldwell ancestors. "It's a lovely house, it really is. Enjoy it, Eleanor. Enjoy every minute of it." And she turned and she walked away, leaving Eleanor Caldwell standing frozen in the middle of her own party, holding a glass of champagne she could no longer feel in her hand. "Claire?" It was Nathan. He had caught up to her near the windows, and his voice cracked on her name the way hers had cracked on his in the rain outside the courthouse, and there was something almost pitiful in it now. Claire stopped. She turned to face him. She looked at Nathan Caldwell, the man she had loved for 12 years, the man she had given up her whole self for, and she waited to feel the thing she had spent 6 weeks bracing for. The rage, the grief, the wild, aching pull of a love that had defined half her life. And what she felt standing there looking at him was nothing. Not hatred, not longing, just a vast, quiet nothing, the way you feel looking at a house you used to live in that someone else owns now. And the strangeness of that, the sheer freedom of it, nearly took her breath away. "Claire," Nathan said again, my God, I had no idea about any of this. Your father, if I had known—" "If you had known I was rich," Claire said, "you would have stayed. Is that what you're telling me?" Nathan flinched. That's not what I—" "It's exactly what you meant," Claire said without anger, which was somehow worse. "You just heard it out loud and it sounded ugly." She studied his face, this face she had once known better than her own. "You told me I was convenient, Nathan. You told me I was never the plan. And you know what, you were being honest, probably for the first time in years, and I've actually come to be grateful for it. Because it was the truth. I was a convenience. And the moment I stopped being convenient, you dropped me on a courtroom floor without a second thought." "Claire, please. We were together for 12 years. That has to mean—" "It meant everything to me," Claire said quietly. "That's the part you'll never understand. It meant everything to me, and it meant nothing to you, and I spent 12 years not letting myself see the difference." She shook her head slowly. "I loved you, Nathan. I really did. And you used it. You and your mother, you looked at a woman who loved you and you saw a resource to be managed. And when the resource ran low, you threw it away." She took a breath. "I'm not angry anymore. I want you to know that. I was for a while, but I'm not now. I just don't feel anything at all. And I think that's worse for you than anger would have been, isn't it? Because anger would mean you still mattered." Nathan stared at her, and something broke in his face, and for a moment Claire saw the whole rest of his life laid out behind his eyes, and she understood that he was seeing it too. The businesses that were failing, the mother who ruled him, the Ashford girl who was with him for exactly the same reasons he had once been with Claire. The dawning understanding that the one person who had ever truly loved him for himself was standing in front of him, finally free of him, and would never come back. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "Claire, I made the worst mistake of my life." "Yes," Claire said gently. "You did." And she walked away from him too, and did not look back. She spent the next hour doing something Eleanor Caldwell could never have predicted. She did not gloat. She did not confront anyone else. She simply became, over the course of that single evening, the most sought-after person in the room, and she did it without lifting a finger to make it happen. Because word had spread now the way it always does, in those circles moving faster than any announcement could. The estate, Whitmore, $5 billion, the daughter, the men and women who had spent 12 years looking straight through. Claire Whitmore suddenly discovered that they had always found her fascinating. They approached her one after another with their careful smiles and their extended hands, and Claire received them all with the same easy grace and watched them try to network their way into the good favor of a fortune and let them. But a strange thing happened as the evening went on. They came for the money, but they stayed for her. Because when they actually spoke with Claire Whitmore, when they got past the number and the name, they found something they had not expected. They found a woman who was sharp and warm and quick, who understood their businesses better than they did, who asked questions that cut straight to the heart of things, who listened, really listened in a way that almost no one in that world ever did. They found a person where they had expected only an heiress. "You know," said an old man near the end of the night, a legendary investor whom even Eleanor treated with deference. "I've been coming to these parties for 20 years, and I've met every Caldwell there is to meet, and I have never once had a conversation as interesting as this one. Tell me something, Miss Whitmore. Were you always this sharp, or is this new? Claire smiled. I was always this sharp, she said. I just spent 12 years in a house that needed me to pretend I wasn't. The old man studied her, and then he nodded slowly with the particular respect of a man who recognizes another mind as fast as his own. Their loss, he said simply. Their very great loss. And whoever's fortunate enough to work with you next, their very great gain. He handed her his card. Call me, I mean it. I don't say that to many people, and I never say it at a Caldwell party. And across the room, Eleanor Caldwell watched it happen. She stood by the wall where she had held court for 40 years, and she watched the entire architecture of her world reorganize itself around a woman she had thrown out of a courtroom 6 weeks earlier. She watched her own guests, her people, the ones whose loyalty she had believed she owned, drift one by one across the room to orbit around Claire. She watched the old investor, the one man in New York, whose approval she had chased for 2 decades, hand Claire his card and laugh at something Claire said, and she felt something she had not felt in 40 years, something she barely had a name for. She felt afraid. Mother. Nathan appeared at her side, gray-faced, undone. Mother, we have to. This is a disaster. Look at them, everyone's. We have to do something. There is nothing to do, Eleanor said very quietly, and Nathan turned to stare at her because he had never in his life heard his mother say those words. Look at her, Nathan. Look at how they look at her. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I spent 12 years telling this room that woman was nothing, and they believed me. And now they're going to spend the next 12 years remembering that I was wrong. That's what they'll remember about me now. Not the parties, not the foundation. That I looked at the most impressive woman any of them has ever met, and I called her nothing, and I threw her belongings on a floor. So we explain, Nathan said desperately. We tell them we didn't know about her father. We didn't know she was... That's exactly the problem, Eleanor said, and for the first time in her son's memory, her composure cracked and something old and frightened showed through. Don't you understand? We didn't destroy her, Nathan. We didn't win, and she happened to survive. That's what I could have lived with. She watched Claire laugh with a circle of admirers across the room. We had her. For 12 years we had a woman like that in our own house, and we were too small to see it. We looked at the best thing that ever came into this family, and we treated her like the help. And now the whole world is going to see exactly what we threw away. Her hand rose slowly to her throat. We didn't destroy her, Nathan. God help me. We built her. Every cruel thing we did, every time we made her small, we were building the woman who's going to replace us. And she didn't even have to lift a finger. She just walked in the door and let us watch. Nathan had no answer. There was no answer. Across the room, as if she had felt the weight of their attention, Claire glanced over at them, mother and son, standing frozen against the wall of their own crumbling kingdom. And she did not gloat. She did not smile in triumph. She simply raised her glass to them, a small, courteous gesture, the kind of thing one guest offers a host, and there was something in it far more devastating than any cruelty could have been. There was unmistakably forgiveness. Not the warm kind, the other kind. The kind that says, I have risen so far above what you did to me that it no longer costs me anything to be gracious about it. The kind that made it permanently clear that Claire Whitmore had stopped needing anything from the Caldwell family at all, including their downfall. Eleanor Caldwell did not raise her glass back. She could not. Her hand had begun very slightly to shake. Claire turned back to her conversation. She stayed another half hour, exactly long enough to be gracious, and not a minute longer. And then she said her goodbyes, warm and unhurried, collecting the cards and the invitations and the promises of lunch that were pressed on her from every direction. And then she walked back up the short staircase she had descended 2 hours earlier, and at the top of it she paused, and she looked back one last time at the great room at the party at the mansion, at the entire glittering world that had once decided she was nothing. She was not thinking about revenge. She was thinking about her father, about the letter, about the line she had read a dozen times now, the one that said the only real protection in this world is to never again be at the mercy of someone who wishes you harm. She understood it fully now, standing at the top of those stairs. She was free. Not because she had destroyed them. She had not touched them. Every debt she held, she still held quietly unused. She was free because she had walked back into the one room where they had made her smallest, and she had discovered that they no longer had any power over her at all, and that the discovery had cost her nothing but the price of a gown and one calm evening. That was the victory, not their ruin, her freedom. She stepped out into the night, and the black car was waiting, and as it pulled away from the Caldwell mansion, Claire did not look back at the lights in the windows. She was already looking ahead. Alexander Hayes was waiting up for her when she returned to the suite, and he took one look at her face and knew. "Well," he said. Claire set down her small bag. She slipped off the shoes that had carried her through the longest, strangest evening of her life, and she was quiet for a moment, gathering it. "They're finished," she said finally. "Not because of anything I did tonight. I didn't do anything, Alex. I just showed up, and they finished themselves the way they always would have the second the world could finally see me next to them." She looked at him. "Eleanor knows. She said it herself near the end. She said they didn't destroy me, they built me. She actually said it." Alexander Hayes let out a slow breath. "That's a rare thing," he said. "For a person like that to see themselves clearly, it usually never happens." "It happened tonight," Claire said. "I watched it happen on her face." She sat down slowly. "And I thought I'd feel triumphant, Alex. I really did. I spent 6 weeks imagining how it would feel to walk into that room and watch her understand. And instead, I just felt tired and a little sad. And mostly, more than anything, I felt like myself. Like the woman I was before all of it. Like I finally got her back." Her voice caught just slightly. "That's the part I didn't expect. I didn't get revenge tonight. I got me back, and it turns out that was the only thing I ever actually wanted." Alexander Hayes looked at her for a long moment. This woman with her father's eyes sitting in the quiet of the suite in her deep blue gown, having walked through the fire and come out the other side as fully herself. "He'd be proud of you," he said quietly. "Richard, he'd be so proud. This is exactly what he hoped for. Not that you'd defeat them, that you'd become so completely yourself that defeating them stopped mattering." He shook his head slowly. "You did it, Claire, in one evening. You did the thing he spent his whole life hoping you'd be able to do." Claire was quiet for a long moment, long. And then she said something that made Alexander Hayes sit forward, because it was not the voice of a woman looking back at a victory. It was the voice of a woman looking forward at a beginning. "There's still a truth in all of this that no one said out loud yet," Claire said slowly. "Everyone keeps talking about what they did to me, the cruelty, the humiliation. But there's a bigger truth underneath it. Alex and I think it's time I understood it completely." She looked at him. Nathan's whole life, his whole success, all of it was built on borrowed money and connections, and someone else holding him up. And for 12 years, the someone holding him up was me. The dinners I ran, the relationships I kept alive, the mistakes I covered. His entire empire had my invisible labor holding up every wall of it, and none of them ever knew because they decided I was nothing, and nothing can't be load-bearing. Her eyes had gone very sharp. "But I was, and now I'm gone, and I don't think any of them have understood yet what that actually means for what comes next." Alexander Hayes went very still. "What are you saying?" he asked. Claire rose from her chair. She walked to the window and she looked out at the sleeping city, and when she spoke, her voice was calm and certain and entirely her own. "I'm saying I want to understand exactly what held that family up," she said. "Every beam, every wall, every secret. Because I have a feeling, Alex, that when we really look, we're going to find that the whole thing was standing on things that were never true. And I want to know all of it, not to destroy them." She turned from the window. "Because I don't think I'll have to. I think the truth is going to do that all on its own. And when it does, I intend to be the only person in the room who saw it coming." The truth began to surface exactly 1 week after the gala, and it came, as Claire had predicted, entirely on its own. She was in the study of the Connecticut house now. the house her father had left her, the one she had never seen until 3 weeks ago, and had slowly come to love. She spent her mornings there with Alexander Hayes, learning the empire piece by piece, and it was on one of those mornings that Hayes came in with a folder in his hand and a strange expression on his face. "You told me you wanted to understand what held that family up," he said. "Every beam and every wall. I've been looking. And Claire, I need to show you something, because it's worse than either of us thought." Claire set down her coffee. "Show me." He laid the folder open on the desk, and over the next hour, he walked her through what he had found, and with every page, the picture grew darker and clearer at once. Nathan Caldwell's businesses were not merely struggling, they were fraudulent. For the last 3 years, in order to keep his ventures afloat and his mother from discovering the truth, Nathan had been falsifying the books. He had been reporting revenue that did not exist, moving money between the family companies to make failing operations look profitable, borrowing against assets he had already borrowed against, building a paper tower of lies to hold up the appearance of a success that had died years ago. And every dollar of it, every falsified statement, every fraudulent loan was leveraged against notes that Richard Whitmore had purchased and that now belonged in full to Claire. "He's been committing fraud," Claire said, slowly reading. "Real fraud, the kind that has a prison sentence attached to it." "The kind that has a prison sentence attached to it," Alexander Hayes confirmed quietly. "And here's the part that matters for you, because these debts are yours. Now you're one of the parties he defrauded. The false statements were used to secure financing from notes you hold, which means, Claire, you are legally the injured party. You could bring this to the authorities tomorrow. You wouldn't have to lift a finger to destroy him. You just have to tell the truth about what he did, and the law would do the rest." Claire sat back in her chair. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the pages. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. 3 days, Hayes admitted. "I wanted to be certain before I showed you. I had 2 forensic accountants go through every line. There's no ambiguity, Claire. It isn't sloppy bookkeeping or aggressive accounting. It's deliberate. It's methodical. Someone who knew exactly what the rules were and broke every one of them on purpose over and over for years." He paused. "That someone is Nathan." "He was never that careful about anything in his life," Claire murmured. "Not once. The Nathan I knew couldn't organize a dinner reservation without help. And you're telling me he ran a 3-year fraud scheme. That's the strange part," Hayes said. "The scheme is careful, almost too careful for him, which makes me wonder whether he had help, whether someone was guiding him, someone who understood how these instruments worked well enough to hide the holes." Claire's eyes lifted from the page. "Eleanor." "I don't know yet," Hayes said. "I can't prove it. The paper trail leads to Nathan and stops there cleanly, which is itself suspicious. But I've watched that woman operate for 30 years from a distance, and I'll tell you what I think off the record. Eleanor Caldwell has never once let her son make an important decision without her fingerprints somewhere on it. If Nathan was drowning for 3 years, I find it very hard to believe she didn't know he was in the water." Claire absorbed that. She thought about Eleanor at the gala, the composure, the certainty, a woman who had ruled her world for 40 years by knowing exactly where every body was buried. And she thought, too, of the possibility that Eleanor had known her son was committing fraud, and had said nothing had let it continue, had built her charity galas and her social reign on top of a crime she was quietly aware of the whole time. "There's more," Alexander Hayes said gently, "and I debated whether to show you this part at all, but you told me you wanted all of it." He turned to the last page in the folder. "The invisible support you talked about," he said. "The dinners you ran, the relationships you kept alive, the mistakes you covered. I went back and looked, Claire, because you said something at the gala that stuck with me, and you were right. It's worse than you knew. For 12 years, you were the only thing standing between Nathan's incompetence and total collapse. Every time he was about to lose a client, you smoothed it over at a dinner. Every time he insulted a partner, you repaired the relationship. You held that entire network together with your own hands, and you did it so quietly that no one, including you, understood what you were actually doing." He looked at her. "The businesses didn't start failing when the market turned. They started failing the day you left. You were the load-bearing wall. And the moment you walked out of that courtroom, the whole thing began to come down. It's been coming down for 6 weeks. Nathan's fraud is just the frantic sound of a man trying to hold up a building after the wall's already gone. Claire stared at the page, and something moved through her that was not triumph and was not vindication, though it contained pieces of both. It was something larger and stranger, a kind of terrible clarity. For 12 years, she had believed she was the small one, the weak one, the woman who contributed nothing and was lucky to be tolerated. Eleanor had told her so at every dinner. Nathan had told her so in the end, and she had believed them so completely that even now, even holding the proof in her own hands, part of her struggled to accept it. "I was holding the whole thing up," she said softly. "The entire time. They told me I was nothing, and the truth was I was everything. I was the only reason any of it worked." "Yes," Alexander Hayes said. "You were." "Say that again," Claire said quietly. Hayes looked at her and understood and did not treat it as strange. "You were everything," he said slowly and clearly. "You were the reason it worked, all of it. Every year they told you that you contributed nothing. You were the only thing keeping the whole family from ruin. That's not a comfort I'm offering you, Claire. It's a fact I'm reporting. It's in the numbers." Claire pressed her lips together and looked away out the window, because there were things happening behind her eyes that she did not want even Hayes to see. Because here was the cruelty of it, the deepest cut of all. For 12 years, part of her had believed them. That was the part she was only now beginning to understand. It was one thing to be humiliated by other people. It was another thing entirely to discover that you had joined them in the humiliation, that you had spent 12 years agreeing with the people who told you that you were small, that some quiet voice inside you had said, "They must be right. Look how sure they are." And now, holding the proof that it had all been a lie, she felt not only vindicated but grief-stricken, because she was mourning 12 years of a woman who had believed a cruel and total lie about her own worth. "I want to know one thing," she said finally, turning back. "Did he ever thank me in 12 years? Even once? Did Nathan ever a single time understand that I was carrying him?" Alexander Hayes was quiet for a moment. "I can't answer that. I wasn't there. But Claire, I can tell you what the numbers say. And the numbers say that a man who understood what you were doing for him would never have let you walk out of that courthouse with 3 bags. He'd have crawled across broken glass to keep you." He paused. "The fact that he threw you away is the proof he never once understood. Not because you weren't essential. Because he was too small to see the essential thing standing right in front of him." Claire closed the folder. She stood and she walked to the window and she looked out at the grounds of the house her father had left her, and she thought for a long time about what she was going to do with the knowledge in that folder. She thought about her father's letter. She thought about the promise she had made to herself in a $47 motel room that she would not become the thing they tried to make her. She thought about the difference between justice and revenge, and how easy it was when you finally held the power to tell yourself they were the same thing. "Get me a meeting with them," she said finally. "Eleanor and Nathan, both of them, here or wherever they'll agree to. I want to look at them when I decide what happens next." "Are you sure?" Hayes asked. "You don't owe them a meeting. You could handle all of this through lawyers and never see either of their faces again." "I know I don't owe them anything," Claire said. "That's exactly why I want to do it in person, because a person who does this through lawyers is hiding. And I'm done hiding from those two. I want to sit across from them in my father's house and look them in the eye when I tell them what comes next. Not because I need to, because I can. And because 6 weeks ago, I couldn't even make Nathan look at me across a courtroom. I've earned the right to be looked at now. I intend to use it." Alexander Hayes nodded slowly, and there was respect in it. "I'll arrange it." It took 10 days. 10 days during which the walls closed in on the Caldwell family faster than even Hayes had predicted. Claire watched it happen from a distance through the reports Hayes brought her each morning, and she did not touch a single thing. She did not have to. She had simply quietly stopped. She had instructed Hayes to cease every quiet accommodation her father's holdings had been extending to the Caldwell businesses, every soft extension, every patient renewal, every invisible cushion that Richard Whitmore had apparently maintained for years, for reasons Claire was only beginning to understand. And the moment those cushions were gone, the floor gave way. Creditors who had been patient became impatient. Partners who had been reassured grew nervous. The careful paper tower Nathan had built to hide his fraud began to sway, because paper towers only stand as long as no one leans on them, and now, without Claire's invisible hand holding the whole structure steady, everyone was leaning at once. By the time Eleanor and Nathan Caldwell came to the Connecticut house, they were not coming as adversaries. They were coming as people drowning, reaching for the only hand left in the water, and that hand belonged to the woman they had thrown away. They had not wanted to come. Claire understood that. Coming meant admitting that they needed something from her, and for Eleanor Caldwell, needing something from Claire Whitmore was a humiliation almost beyond bearing. But they came because by then the walls were closing in fast. The businesses were in free fall. Creditors were circling. And word had begun to travel through their world that the Caldwell fortune was not what everyone had believed, that the grand old family was standing on nothing at all. They came because they were desperate, and desperate people will do almost anything. Claire received them in the study. She did not stand when they entered. She did not offer them a warm welcome. She simply looked at them, mother and son, as they came into the room, and she saw immediately how much 6 weeks had changed them. Eleanor's composure was a brittle shell now cracked at the edges. Nathan looked like a man who had not slept in a month, gray and hollow, his hands unsteady. "Sit," Claire said. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. They sat. For a moment no one spoke. Eleanor's eyes moved around the study, taking in the wealth of it, the quiet, deep, genuine wealth that made her own mansion look suddenly like what it was, a stage set, a performance. And Claire watched her understand fully, for perhaps the first time, exactly how badly she had misjudged the woman she had thrown away. "This was your father's?" Eleanor said. It was not really a question. Her eyes moved over the shelves, the paintings, the sheer unhurried substance of the room. "This is real, all of it. He really was." "He really was," Claire said. "Everything I told you at the gala, all of it true. I know how much you want it to be a lie, Eleanor. I watched you hope it was a lie for a week straight. But it isn't. My father built one of the largest private fortunes in this country with his own 2 hands, and he let the world believe he was a mechanic the entire time because he understood something about wealth that you never learned in 40 years of chasing it." She held the older woman's eyes. He understood then the people who most need everyone to know how rich they are usually the ones with the least underneath them. Real power doesn't announce itself, Eleanor. It doesn't throw galas to be seen. It doesn't need to. Only fear does that. And your whole life was fear wearing a very expensive dress. Eleanor flinched, but she did not argue. Perhaps she no longer had the strength to. It was Eleanor who broke first, which surprised Claire. "Claire," she said, and her voice had lost all of its old command, all of its music. "I have come here to apologize, and I want you to know that I mean it. I was wrong, about you, about all of it. I have thought of nothing else for 6 weeks, and I understand now what I did, and I am so deeply sorry." Claire looked at her. And here was the thing she had not expected. She searched Eleanor's face, and she believed her. She believed that Eleanor Caldwell was sorry, but she understood too exactly what that sorrow was made of. It was not the sorrow of a woman who had wronged another human being. It was the sorrow of a woman who had made a catastrophic strategic error and was watching it destroy her. Eleanor was not sorry she had been cruel. She was sorry the cruelty had turned out to be so expensive. "You're sorry now," Claire said quietly. "I believe that. But let's be honest with each other, Eleanor, for once. You're not sorry you humiliated me. You're sorry it cost you. If I'd walked out of that courthouse and stayed poor, if I'd disappeared the way you expected me to, you'd never have thought about me again. You'd be at a dinner party right now telling the story of the mechanic's daughter and laughing." She let the words land. "You're not apologizing because you did something wrong. You're apologizing because you got caught being who you've always been." Eleanor's mouth opened, and then closed, because there was nothing to say. It was true, and both of them knew it was true, and the knowing sat in the room like a third presence. "I want to say you're wrong," Eleanor said at last very quietly. "I want to Claire, but I've had 6 weeks to sit with it, and I can't. That's the thing I keep running into. Every time I try to defend myself, I hear how it sounds, and I stop." Her hands twisted in her lap. "Do you know what I've realized, sitting in that house these last weeks, watching it come apart? I've realized I don't actually know who I am without the thing I built. I've been Eleanor Caldwell for 40 years. And Eleanor Caldwell was the parties and the name and the reputation and the pleasure of being the most important woman in every room. And now all of that is going, and I keep asking myself, what's left underneath? And Claire, the answer terrifies me, because I don't think there's anything there. I think I spent 40 years building a woman with nothing inside her." For a moment, something almost like sympathy moved through Claire. It surprised her. "I know that feeling," she said quietly. "I know it very well, actually. I felt it on the courthouse steps. I sat down in the rain and I thought there's nothing left of me, because I built my whole self out of being your son's wife, and now that's gone, so I'm gone." She looked at Eleanor steadily. "The difference is I was wrong. There was something underneath. There always had been. You just needed me to believe there wasn't." She paused. "Whether there's anything underneath you, Eleanor, I honestly don't know. That's not my problem to solve. But I'll tell you the only thing that ever worked for me. You find out by losing everything and then discovering what's still standing when the last of it is gone. It's a terrible way to learn, but it's the only real way I know." "That's not," Nathan started. "Don't," Claire said, and something in her voice stopped him cold. She turned to him slowly. "Don't you dare defend her, Nathan, and don't you dare defend yourself, because I know now. I know all of it." She let a silence build. "I know about the books." The color drained from Nathan's face so fast, Claire thought for a moment he might faint. "I don't," he stammered. "I don't know what you—" "You've been committing fraud for 3 years," Claire said evenly, without raising her voice, which made it far more terrifying than any shout. "Falsifying revenue, moving money to hide the failures, borrowing against assets that were already leveraged, building a tower of lies to keep your mother from finding out that everything she believed about your success was a fiction." She watched him. "And every single one of those fraudulent loans is secured against notes that I hold, which makes me the party you defrauded. Do you understand what that means, Nathan? It means I don't have to destroy you. All I have to do is tell the truth, and you'll go to prison." The room went utterly silent. Eleanor turned to stare at her son, and Claire watched a second catastrophe unfold on the older woman's face, because this Eleanor had not known. The fraud, the lies. Her own son had been deceiving her for 3 years, and she was learning it now in this room from the woman she had thrown away. "Nathan," Eleanor whispered, "what is she talking about? What have you done?" Nathan could not look at his mother. He stared at the floor and his shoulders began to shake. "Nathan," Eleanor said again, and her voice climbed sharp with panic now. "Look at me. Tell me she's wrong. Tell me she's making it up. Tell me my son did not commit fraud in my own family's name." "I can't," Nathan choked out. "I can't tell you that, Mother, because she's not wrong. She's not making anything up." He finally lifted his head and his eyes were wet and wild. "It's all true. Everything she said. Mother, I've been lying to you for years. The businesses have been failing since Claire left. Nothing works without her. I never understood how much I couldn't keep it up. I couldn't tell you. I just kept lying and it kept getting worse, and I didn't know how to stop." "Why didn't you come to me?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me things were failing? We could have. I could have." "Come to you." Nathan laughed, and it was an awful, broken sound. "Mother, I have spent my entire life terrified of coming to you. Do you have any idea what it was like being your son? Nothing was ever good enough. Every failure was a catastrophe. Every weakness was a disgrace. You raised me to believe that a Caldwell does not fail, a Caldwell does not struggle, a Caldwell does not need help. So when I started failing, when I started drowning, what was I supposed to do? Tell you, watch you look at me the way you looked at Claire. His voice broke completely. I would rather have gone to prison than watch you look at me like I was nothing. So I lied. For 3 years I lied to the one person I was most afraid of, and I told myself I was protecting the family, but I was just protecting myself from you, Cal. The words landed in the room like a bomb. Eleanor Caldwell sat frozen, and Claire watched in real time a woman come apart at the discovery that her own cruelty had not only destroyed her daughter-in-law, but had shaped her son into a criminal too frightened of her to ask for help. It was Claire understood the deepest wound Eleanor could possibly receive, and no one had inflicted it but Eleanor herself. I did that, Eleanor whispered. I made you so afraid of me that you committed a crime rather than tell me the truth. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Both of you. I did this to both of you. My God, what did I build? What kind of family did I build where the two people closest to me would rather be destroyed than come to me for help? For a long moment, no one spoke. The three of them sat in the wreckage of it, the mother and the son and the woman they had thrown away, and the whole terrible architecture of the Caldwell family stood exposed in the light at last, and there was nothing beautiful left in any of it. Nathan turned back to Claire. You could send me to prison, he said. His voice was barely audible. You'd be right to. I know that. I know exactly what I did to you, and I know I deserve whatever you decide. He looked at her with an expression of pure, hollow desperation. Why did you leave, Claire? Everything worked when you were there. Everything held together. And I threw you away, and I didn't even know what I was throwing away until it was gone. And there it was. The truth at last spoken out loud in the middle of the study by the man who had spent 12 years refusing to see it. He had thrown her away because he believed she had no power. He had thought she was replaceable, interchangeable, a convenience. And he had been catastrophically, ruinously wrong, and now he understood it, and understanding it had broken him. Claire looked at him for a long time, and she waited one final time to feel the thing she had braced herself to feel. The triumph, the vindication, the sweetness of watching the man who had discarded her beg at her feet. It was right there hers for the taking. She had earned it. No one in the world would have blamed her for reaching out and taking it. But it did not come. What came instead, to her own surprise, was something quieter and far more complicated. She looked at Nathan Caldwell weeping in her father's study, and she felt a strange, distant pity, the kind of pity you feel for someone who has done something terrible and is only now too late becoming a person capable of understanding what they did. He was not a monster. That was the hardest part. He was just a small man who had been handed everything and understood nothing, who had married a woman worth 10 of him and spent 12 years too blind to see it, and who would now spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he had thrown away. There was no punishment Claire could invent that would be worse than that. He would carry it forever, whether she sent him to prison or not. Do you want to know the honest answer to your question? Claire said. Why I left. Nathan nodded barely. I didn't leave, Nathan, she said. That's the thing you never understood even now. You divorced me. You and your mother decided I was no longer useful, and you removed me in a courtroom in front of a crowd you invited to watch. I didn't walk away from our marriage. I was thrown out of it. And the reason everything fell apart the moment I was gone isn't that I left in some fit of spite. It's that you finally succeeded in getting rid of the one thing holding your entire world together, and you were too blind to know that's what you were doing until the walls started coming down. She held his eyes. You didn't lose me because I abandoned you. You lost me because you threw me away, and now you have to live in a world you built by throwing away the best thing in it. That's not my doing, Nathan. That's yours, every bit of it. Here is what's going to happen, Claire said finally, and both of them looked up. I'm not going to send you to prison, Nathan, she said, and she watched the shock move across both their faces. Not because you don't deserve it, you do, but because I made a promise to myself and to my father, and I intend to keep it. I told myself I would not become the thing you tried to make me, and sending you to prison to satisfy something in myself, that's exactly what Eleanor would do. That's exactly who you both are. And I am not going to let the two of you turn me into a version of yourselves on the way out the door. Go on. She stood and she walked around the desk and she stood in front of them and she looked down at the mother and the son who had once looked down on her. But understand this clearly, she said. I am not going to protect you either, and that's the part you're not prepared for. Because you don't understand yet what I actually was to you. For 12 years I held your entire world together, and none of you ever knew it. I was the wall you leaned on and never saw, and every debt you have, every note that keeps the lights on in that mansion, every dollar of financing your businesses run on, all of it belongs to me now. She let it settle. I'm not going to call any of it in. I'm not going to take your house or liquidate your businesses or drag your name through the courts. I don't need to, because for the last 6 weeks, you've been living in a world where I quietly held everything up. And starting today, I'm simply going to stop. Eleanor's face had gone chalk white. Stop, she said. What do you mean, stop? I mean, I'm going to let go, Claire said. That's all. I'm not going to push you off a cliff, Eleanor. I'm just going to stop being the thing that was keeping you from the edge without your ever knowing I was there. No more quiet extensions on your notes. No more invisible support in the rooms where these things get decided. No more Claire holding up the walls. I'm going to take my hands off of everything completely, and I'm going to let you stand on your own. On the foundation you actually built, the one made of Nathan's lies and your cruelty, and 40 years of appearances with nothing underneath them. She looked at them steadily. And we're both going to find out together exactly how much of the Caldwell name was ever real. My guess is not very much. But you'll get to discover that for yourselves, standing on your own 2 feet, the way you always insisted I should have to. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. And then Eleanor Caldwell did something Claire had never once seen her do in 12 years of marriage. She began to cry. Not the composed, strategic tears of a woman performing regret. Real tears, ugly and helpless, the tears of someone watching the entire edifice of their life come apart, and understanding finally that there was nothing left to hold it together, because the only thing that ever had was a woman she had thrown out onto the street. Please, Eleanor whispered. Claire, I know I have no right to ask, but everything I have, everything my family built, it's all. If you take your hands off of it, we'll lose everything. The house, the name, everything. Claire looked at her. I know, she said not unkindly. I truly do. I know exactly what it feels like to lose everything, Eleanor. To walk out with 3 bags and no name and no one in the world. You're the one who taught me what that felt like. Remember, you threw a box on the floor to make sure I learned it thoroughly. She crouched down so that she was eye level with the older woman, and her voice was quiet and almost gentle. I'm not doing this to you out of revenge. I want you to understand that, because it matters to me that you understand it. I'm not throwing your belongings on the floor. I'm not laughing while you cry. I would never do to you what you did to me. I'm simply stepping out of the way and letting you face the truth of what you actually built. And if it can't stand on its own, Eleanor, then it was never really standing at all. It was standing on me, and I'm done being the thing that other people stand on. There's one more thing, Claire added, rising back to her full height. And I want you to hear it clearly, both of you, because it's the last thing I'm ever going to say to you. I forgive you. Eleanor's head came up sharply, disbelieving. I don't say it to be kind, Claire went on. I say it because I finally understand what forgiveness actually is. It isn't a gift I'm giving you. It's a door I'm closing behind myself. For 6 weeks, I carried the two of you around inside me, the courtroom, the box, the laughter, all of it, and it was heavy, and I've decided I don't want to carry it anymore, so I'm setting it down. That's what forgiveness is. It's me refusing to spend one more day of my life being defined by the worst thing you ever did to me. She looked at them both. You don't get to keep living in my head, rent-free, shaping who I am. I'm evicting you. That's all forgiveness ever was. Not a favor to you, a freedom for me. She stepped back. You should go now, she said. Both of you. There's nothing more for us to say. I've made my decision, and it's more mercy than either of you would have shown me. I'd suggest you spend whatever time you have left preparing for what comes next, instead of trying to change my mind. because my mind is made up, and I promise you it will not change again." They left. Eleanor Caldwell, who had swept through 40 years of rooms as though she owned the very air, walked out of Claire's study with her son's arm to steady her, small and gray, and finally truly understanding what she had done. And Nathan at the door paused one last time and turned back. "Claire," he said, "for what it's worth, and I know it's worth nothing now, but I did love you, in the beginning, before my mother and the family and all of it got into it. Whatever I became, whatever I let them turn me into, there was a version of me that loved you. I just wasn't strong enough to be him." Claire looked at him, and she gave him the truest thing she had. "I know," she said quietly. "That's the saddest part of all of it, Nathan. I think there was a version of you that could have been a good man, and you let them talk you out of him, the same way they talked me out of myself." She held his eyes. "The difference is, I got mine back, and you never will, because there's no one left to give him to." Nathan Caldwell stood there for a moment, absorbing that, understanding it fully, and then he nodded once, and he turned and he walked out of the house and out of Claire's life, and this time it was Claire who did not look away, and Nathan who could not bear to look back. Alexander Hayes came in a few minutes later. He had been waiting in the next room. He found Claire standing at the window watching the car pull away down the long drive. "You had them," he said quietly. "You could have ended them completely. Prison, ruin, everything. And you let them walk out." "I didn't let them walk out of anything," Claire said, still watching the car grow small. "They're going to lose everything, Alex. The house, the businesses, the name. All of it is coming down, and I'm not going to lift a finger to stop it. The only thing I'm not doing is pushing. And that's not mercy exactly. It's something else. It's just refusing to let them make me into a person who pushes." She turned from the window. "I spent 6 weeks thinking the victory would be watching them fall. And you know what I realized in that room just now? Watching them fall doesn't interest me at all. It never did. That was Eleanor's kind of victory, the kind where you have to grind someone under your heel to feel tall." "Then what's your kind?" Alexander Hayes asked. Claire was quiet for a moment. "My kind," she said slowly, "is the thing that happened in that room when I realized I didn't feel anything I'd expected to feel. No triumph, no hunger, just this, quiet. Because the real victory, Alex, the one I didn't understand until just now, was never about them at all. It was about getting all the way back to the woman I was before them. The one who ran that marketing firm, the one my father talked about at every dinner, the one who existed before a family, spent 12 years convincing me she was nothing." Her voice was steady and clear. "I'm her again, completely. And the proof isn't that I destroyed the people who tried to erase her. The proof is that now that I have all the power in the world to do it, I find that I simply don't want to. Because she never wanted that. That was never who she was, and I finally got her back." Alexander Hayes looked at her for a long, quiet moment, and there was something in his eyes that was almost reverence. "He used to say," Hayes said softly, "that the measure of a person isn't what they do when they're powerless. It's what they do the moment they finally have power. He said most people spend their whole lives dreaming of getting even, and the tragedy is that the day they finally can, they do, and it turns them into exactly what they hated." He shook his head slowly. "You had the trigger in your hand, Claire, and you set it down. Again. He'd have wept to see it. He really would have." Claire looked out the window one last time at the empty drive where the Caldwell's car had disappeared. "He didn't give me an empire," she said quietly, almost to herself. "That's what I understand now. Everyone keeps saying he gave me an empire, but that's not what he did. He gave me back to myself, and then he trusted me to be the person he always believed I was, even after they'd spent 12 years telling me I was someone else entirely." She pressed her hand lightly against the glass. That was the real inheritance, not the money, the belief. He believed in me until I could believe in myself again, and now I do. Completely. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I know exactly who I am. She turned away from the window. "There's work to do," she said. "Real work. The foundation. All those women out there right now who feel exactly the way I felt on those courthouse steps, believing their lives are over, believing they're nothing, because someone convinced them they were. Her jaw set with quiet determination. I know how to reach them, Alex, because I was them. 6 weeks ago, I was every single one of them, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure they find out the same thing I did. She picked up the folder from the desk, the one full of the Caldwell's secrets, and without a second glance, she dropped it into the drawer and closed it. That they were never nothing, not for one single day. They just had the bad luck to be surrounded by people who needed them to believe it. 1 year later, the woman who had walked out of a courthouse with 3 bags and $47 stood behind a podium in a ballroom full of people who had come to hear her speak, and not one of them thought of her as anything less than one of the most respected figures in the country. The transformation had not happened by accident, and it had not happened because of the money. Claire understood that distinction better than anyone now. The money had been the tool. But the thing that had made Claire Whitmore a name, people spoke with genuine respect. The thing that had turned an unknown heiress into a leader that seasoned business figures actively sought out was the work. And the work had a name, the Whitmore Foundation. In 12 months, it had grown into something Claire could scarcely have imagined that first night in the Connecticut study. Her father had built the quiet foundation for one reason: to help women rebuild their careers and their lives after losing themselves in marriages and circumstances that had swallowed them whole. Claire had taken that mission and poured her entire self into it. And because she knew the wound from the inside, because she had lived every day of the thing she was now trying to heal, the foundation had become something no committee of well-meaning strangers could ever have built. "We've placed our 1,000th woman," Alexander Hayes had told her 3 weeks earlier, coming into her office with a look on his face she had never seen there before, something between pride and wonder. 1,000 women, Claire, in 1 year, 1,000 women who came to us believing they had nothing left, and who walked out with careers with confidence, with their own income and their own names. 1,000. He had set the report on her desk. "Your father's foundation placed a few dozen a year quietly for a decade. You've done 1,000 in 12 months. Do you understand what you've built here?" Claire had looked at the number, and she had thought about the woman on the courthouse steps, and she had not been able to speak for a moment. "I understand exactly what I've built," she had said finally. "I built the thing I needed and didn't have, that's all. Every program in this foundation, every service, every piece of it is the thing I wished someone had handed me the night I was sitting in a $47 motel room thinking my life was over. I'm not doing anything clever, Alex. I'm just being the person I needed for 1,000 people who need her." But what made the foundation extraordinary was not the number. It was the way Claire ran it. She did not run it from a distance the way wealthy people so often ran their charities, showing up for the galas and the photographs and letting professionals do the actual work. She ran it with her own hands. She met the women. She sat across from them one after another in the plain rooms where they first came in, frightened and small, and she talked to them and she listened to them and she told them the truth about herself. All of it. The courtroom and the box and the 3 bags and the $2, and she watched their faces change as they realized that the powerful woman in front of them had once been exactly where they were sitting. That's the thing that undoes them. Sophia Bennett observed one afternoon, watching Claire through the glass of a conference room as she sat with a new group of women. Sophia had stayed on long after her original job of teaching Claire to be seen had ended, because she had discovered somewhere along the way that she believed in this more than she had ever believed in anything. You'd think it would be the money that inspires them, the success, but it isn't. It's the courtroom. It's the $2. The moment you tell them you were where they are, something breaks open in the room. You can watch it happen. She shook her head. Most powerful people spend their whole lives hiding the worst thing that ever happened to them. You lead with it, and it's the most powerful thing about you. Because the worst thing that ever happened to me is the only reason I can help them at all, Claire said. If I'd been born into this, if I'd never sat on those steps in the rain, I'd be useless to these women. I'd be one more comfortable person telling them it gets better without any idea what better even costs. She watched a woman in the conference room, maybe 50, maybe 55 hands folded tight in her lap, the exact posture Claire remembered from her own body a year ago. I know what that woman is feeling right now. I know it in my bones. She's thinking she's too old to start over. She's thinking she gave up her career 20 years ago and there's nothing left of the person she used to be. She's thinking the world has already decided she's finished. Claire's jaw tightened with quiet resolve. And I'm going to spend the next hour proving to her that every single one of those thoughts is a lie somebody else planted in her head. Because that's what somebody should have done for me, and nobody did, until my father. Oh. That word father still moved through Claire differently than any other, because the strangest and most beautiful thing about the year that had passed was not the foundation or the respect or the fortune she now commanded with a steadiness that surprised everyone but Alexander Hayes. The strangest and most beautiful thing was that Claire had in a way she never expected gotten her father back, not in life. That door had closed 3 days before she ever knew it existed, and the grief of it, the grief of having lost 16 years, she could have had still caught her sometimes in quiet moments and took her breath away. But she had gotten him back in another way, because everywhere she turned in the empire, he had left her. She found him. She found his handwriting in the margins of old files. She found people who had known him who lit up when they realized who she was, who told her stories about a man she had spent 16 years believing had abandoned her. And slowly, story by story, she had assembled a portrait of Richard Whitmore that healed something she had thought would never heal. He kept everything, she told Alexander Hayes one evening, months into it. Sitting on the floor of her father's study, surrounded by boxes, she had finally found the courage to open. Look at this, Alex. Every school report, every drawing I ever made him. A newspaper clipping from when I made the honor roll in 9th grade. He kept all of it. For 16 years, he kept all of it in a locked room in the house of a man the whole world thought was a stranger to me. Her voice was thick. He never stopped being my father, not for one single day. He just did it from a distance in the dark where I couldn't see it, and I spent all those years hating him for it. He knew you'd hate him, Hayes said quietly. He told me once. He said my daughter is going to spend her whole life believing I abandoned her, and there's nothing I can do about it, because if I explain, I ruin the very thing I'm trying to protect. He said the hardest part of the whole plan wasn't the money or the secrecy. It was letting you hate him, choosing it. Every single day, choosing to let his own daughter believe the worst of him, because he thought it was the only way to give you a chance at becoming yourself. Hayes looked at the boxes. He carried that, Claire, for 16 years. The weight of being hated by the person he loved most in the world and never once being able to defend himself. Claire held one of the drawings, a child's crayon picture of a garage, a stick figure, man holding a wrench, a smaller stick figure beside him holding a smaller wrench, and she cried quietly, the way you cry when grief and gratitude have become so tangled that there is no separating them anymore. I forgive him, she said finally. I need to say it out loud, to someone. I forgive him, Alex, for all of it, for leaving, for the silence, for the 16 years. I understand now what it cost him, and I understand why he did it, and even the parts I still think were wrong. I forgive them, because he was trying in the only way he knew how to give me the one thing nobody else in my life ever did. She wiped her face. He believed I was more than what everyone around me kept telling me I was, and he was willing to be hated for the rest of his life to give me the chance to find that out for myself. There was one thing from the worst day of her life that Claire had kept. She had thrown almost everything else away over the course of that year, the artifacts of a marriage and a family that no longer had any hold on her. But there was one thing she kept, and she kept it in plain view on a shelf in her office where she saw it every single day. The 3 bags. The same 3 cheap bags she had carried out of that courthouse in the rain, holding everything she had left in the world. She had kept them, and she had cleaned them, and she had set them on a shelf where every woman who came into her office would see them, and where she would see them too every morning for the rest of her working life. People ask me about those bags all the time," she told a journalist who came to profile her that year, a serious woman from a serious publication who had expected a standard heiress-turned-philanthropist story and had found something far more compelling. "They assume I keep them as a reminder of the pain, the lowest point, and I understand why they'd think that." Claire looked at the bags on the shelf. "But that's not why. I don't keep them to remember how far down I was. I keep them to remember how far I've come. Those bags aren't a symbol of the day I lost everything. They're a symbol of the day I found out I could survive losing everything. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference in the world." The journalist had written that line at the top of her profile, and the profile had traveled far, and it had brought even more women to the foundation, women who read that sentence and felt something crack open in their own chests, women who thought, if she survived, that maybe I can survive this. Which was, of course, exactly what Claire had intended. There was a letter she kept, too. She had read her father's final letter 100 times in that first month, and then she had put it away because reading it too often felt like wearing a groove into something sacred. But there was one line she returned to again and again, one line that had become something like the North Star of her entire life. Near the end of the letter, after everything else Richard Whitmore had written, "I never wanted to give you my empire. I wanted you to discover the empire you already carried inside yourself. The money was never the gift, Claire Bear. The money was just the thing I used to get out of the way so that you could finally see what was always there. You were never poor. You were never small. You were never nothing. You were a Whitmore, which is to say, you were the daughter of a man who spent his whole life seeing the worth that other people missed. And the greatest thing I ever saw, the truest investment I ever made, the finest thing I ever recognized before anyone else could, was you." Claire understood that line completely now. Her father had not saved her. That was the thing everyone got wrong when they told her story, and by now a great many people were telling her story. They told it as a rescue, a billionaire father swooping in to save his abandoned daughter from ruin. And that was not what had happened at all. Her father had not saved her. He had done something far harder and far more loving than saving her. He had believed in her with everything he had from a distance in silence for 16 years. And then he had arranged things so that when the moment came, she would have to save herself and would discover in the saving that she had always been capable of it. He had not given her strength. He had given her back the strength she already had, and that other people had spent 12 years convincing her to forget. Twice more that year, the Caldwell name crossed Claire's path, and each time she handled it the same way, with a calm that no longer required any effort at all. The first time was the news which reached her the way such news always reaches people sideways, through a colleague who did not know the history. The Caldwell family had lost the mansion. The businesses had collapsed. Nathan's fraud had come to light not through Claire, who had never said a word to anyone about it, but through the ordinary mechanics of a failing enterprise, the way fraud always surfaces eventually when there is no longer any money to paper over it. He had avoided prison, in the end, through a settlement and the sale of nearly everything the family had left. But the name was gone. The reputation was gone. Eleanor Caldwell, who had ruled her world for 40 years, now lived quietly in a small apartment, and the invitations had stopped coming, and the rooms she had once commanded no longer knew her name. Claire felt no triumph when she heard it. She had expected to once long ago, but that woman, the one who had craved the sight of Eleanor's downfall, had been gone for a long time. "I keep waiting to feel something," she admitted to Sophia. "Satisfaction, closure, something, and I just feel a kind of quiet sadness, all that wealth, all that power, 40 years of it, and it came down to nothing because it was built on nothing, on appearances and cruelty and fear, and I keep thinking that could have been me. If I'd taken the trigger when it was in my hand, if I'd become the person my rage wanted me to become, I'd have built my own life on the same nothing. And it would have come down to eventually. It always does." The second time was more personal. A letter arrived at the foundation handwritten, and Claire recognized the hand before she opened it. It was from Eleanor. She almost did not read it. She held it for a long time, and she thought about the courtroom and the box on the floor, and she thought about how far she had come from the woman who would have been undone by anything with the Caldwell name on it. And then she opened it because she was no longer afraid of anything Eleanor Caldwell could say to her. It was short. Eleanor was not a woman who had ever been good at length when it came to sincerity, but it was Claire understood as she read it the most honest thing Eleanor had ever written. Claire, it read, I have had a great deal of time to think this year and very little else. I have lost the things I spent my life believing were the whole of who I was, and I have discovered, as you said I would, that there was very little underneath them. You told me I would have to find out what was still standing when the last of it was gone. I have been finding out. It is not much, but it is more honest than anything I was before. I am not writing to ask you for anything. I know I have no right, and I know you would be a fool to give it. I am writing only to tell you that you were right about all of it, and that I have finally understood the thing I spent 40 years too proud to see. You were the finest person who ever walked into my family, and I treated you as the least. And I did it because your worth frightened me, because next to it my own felt so thin. I made you small so that I would not have to see how large you truly were. That is the whole ugly truth of it. I am sorry. Not because it cost me anything, though it did, because it was wrong, and I am only now at the very end of everything becoming a person capable of knowing the difference, Eleanor. Claire read it twice, and then she set it down, and she was quiet for a long time, and what she felt at last was the thing she had been unable to feel when Eleanor had cried in her study a year before. She felt peace. Not because Eleanor had been ruined, because Eleanor had in the ruin finally become honest, and there was something in that, some small redemption that Claire found she was glad of. She wrote back 3 words, only 3. She did not need more. I forgave you already. And she meant it completely, and she sealed the envelope and sent it, and she closed that door forever, not because Eleanor had earned it, but because Claire had long ago stopped keeping the door open for anyone's sake but her own. On the anniversary of the day her father died one year, exactly from the day her whole life had turned over, Claire stood before that ballroom full of people and gave the speech that would in the years to come be quoted and shared and played for countless women who needed to hear it. She did not talk about money. She did not talk about the empire or the fortune or the fall of the family that had wronged her. She stood at the podium, and she looked out at the room, and she told them the only thing she had ever really had to say. A year ago, she began, I walked out of a courthouse with 3 bags and $47, and I believed my life was over. I believed I was nothing. And I believed it because for 12 years, the people closest to me had told me so every single day until I stopped being able to tell the difference between their voice and my own. She paused, and the room was utterly silent. There are women in this room right now who know exactly what I'm describing, who have someone's voice living in their head, telling them they're finished, telling them they're too old, too used up, too far gone to start again, telling them they're nothing. She leaned forward. I want to say something to every one of you, and I want you to hear it the way I finally heard it. That voice is a lie. It was always a lie, and here is how I know. She let the silence build. My father spent his whole life seeing the worth in things that everyone else had thrown away, Claire said. A company nobody wanted, a stock everyone was dumping, a piece of land they all called worthless. He looked at what the world discarded, and he saw what it could become, and it made him one of the richest men in this country. And the last thing he ever did, the finest investment he ever made, was to look at his own daughter, sitting alone, in the rain, thrown away by everyone she trusted, and to see exactly what everyone else had missed. Her voice caught, and she let it, because there was no shame left in her anywhere. He saw that I was never nothing, that I had never been nothing, not for one single day, that the woman they tried to erase had been standing there the whole time waiting for someone to believe in her, long enough that she could believe in herself. She looked out at this room, at all those faces, at the 1,000 women her foundation had already reached, and the countless more it would reach through this very moment. So this is what I want to leave you with, Claire said. The people who told you that you were nothing were not describing you. They were describing what they needed you to be. Small people need the people around them to be smaller. Frightened people need the people around them to be more frightened. And the cruelest ones, the ones who make you doubt your own worth, they do it because your worth is the very thing that threatens them most. She stood tall, and her voice rang clear and certain through the silent room. You were never nothing. You were the thing they were most afraid of. And the day you remember that, the day you take back the voice in your head and make it your own again, is the day they lose every ounce of power they ever had over you. Not because you destroyed them, because you finally became so completely yourself that they simply stopped mattering. The room rose to its feet, but Claire barely heard the applause because she was looking past all of them out through the tall windows at the city, where 1 year before she had sat on a courthouse step and believed her life was over. And she thought about the old man who had watched her from a black car in the rain, the father who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, and she thought about the letter and the 3 bags on her office shelf and the 1,000 women and the woman she had become. Claire Whitmore had walked out of that courthouse with 3 bags and $47 believing she was nothing. And the family who had thrown her away, the family who had looked at her and seen someone to be discarded, had been forced to watch as the whole world discovered the truth they had been too small and too frightened to see. She had not needed revenge. She had risen so far above them that revenge had become beneath her. She had not needed to destroy them. She had simply become undestroyable. And the woman they had underestimated, the woman they had humiliated, the woman they had thrown away, like something worthless on a courtroom floor, had become one of the most respected, most powerful, most genuinely beloved figures in the country. Not because of the fortune she inherited, but because of the woman she had always been underneath it, the woman her father saw, the woman she finally became again. Claire Whitmore was never nothing. She was the woman they lost, the woman they underestimated, and the woman who proved once and for all and forever that the person you try to erase may just turn out to be the one who is holding up your entire world. And she would never be made small by anyone ever again.